Abandoned structures hold the secrets of America's past. An imposing construction reveals a little-known chapter in an era-defining story.
James Earl Ray killed Martin Luther King. He was an escape artist. He was always a planning.
A frozen landscape shows how wars abroad shaped the homeland.
When they set off all the powder from the bombs, we'd stand outside the house, it would just shake the earth, and the little mushroom clouds would come up.
A ruined house exposes the personal life of one of America's most well-known authors.
This was the home of a very important, famous individual in U.S. history. His books were read by people around the world.
And an ancient wonder offers a glimpse into this land's long human story.
We don't really know why they created this place and then what caused them to leave. That's the great mystery.
Scattered across the United States are abandoned structures. Forgotten ruins of the past, monuments to a bygone era. Each shines a light on the story of this land and its people. These are the secrets of hidden America. Deep in the Heartland, hundreds of miles from the nearest major city, is an old facility with a new secret.
We're out basically in the middle of nowhere. The site is enormous, and we have these different structures dotted around for miles.
The first impression that everybody has when they come here, hands down across the board, is simply wow.
The more you traverse this landscape, the more you realize how much is here and how much possibly happened here.
While much of the site fell into disrepair long ago, the largest section appears almost unchanged.
The scale of the original site is right around the size of Manhattan, but what you see behind me right here, this is the most important part of it all.
The design of the bunkers, the spacing between the bunkers, tells you all you need to know. This is a place that was filled with danger.
But with those risks now long gone, something else is taking root here, and life is slowly beginning to return.
This facility was abandoned for decades, but now things are changing. What these were built for originally makes it absolutely perfect for what it's becoming today.
In operation for over 2 decades, this was once a highly secure military site.
The whole site was security fence. It was all manned 24 hours a day by security guards in armed vehicles, and they patrolled the base. We couldn't get in this. This was off limits.
Tom Simons grew up on a neighboring ranch and recalls the thrill of straying onto forbidden land.
When we were kids, we'd hunt rabbits and bobcats over on the west end, and we found a hole under the fence, and we'd crawl under there and pursue our bobcats, and the guards would come. They were in Jeeps. They had like a 50 caliber machine gun mounted on the back. When you're 9 years old, you get pretty scared.
Now a shell of its former self, at the time, the armed security was here for a reason.
These buildings, from what I gather from some of my friends, was small arms storage, like weapons, 50 caliber machine gun, a handheld, and I guess ammunition for like anti-aircraft and different things like that.
The facility as a whole at some point housed bombs, grenades, rockets, and chemical toxins.
It was a truly nasty cocktail of chemical agents stored, such as VX gas, mustard gas, and sarin. They weren't nice ingredients.
As well as a facility to store weapons, it was also a place where old ones were incinerated, a process that has left lasting memories for those who lived nearby.
Back to when I was growing up as a child, they destroyed poison gases, and the worst memories I had was on the east wind, the smoke from the mustard gas and all the different horrible things which about gag us to death. We couldn't hardly breathe. Our mother would wrap towels around our face and wet them so we could breathe through the towels.
This is the Black Hills Ordnance Depot, a site established to make sure the United States was equipped for war.
After the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, America was thrown into the war, so all of a sudden it was no longer about preparation and more about ramping up production of weapons and munitions.
The purpose of this place was to receive munitions, store it safely, and maintain it so it was ready when it needed to be sent out.
Construction began in early 1942. Here stood a vehicle classification area. Nearby was an airfield, ammunition workshops, and packing areas. Burning grounds for old munitions were located at the edges. Chemical weapons were in the northwest. And it was all constructed remarkably fast.
The thing that impressed me is this entire base was built in about 2 years, which nowadays I don't think it would ever happen. 6,000 men working on it, but everybody did it by the old-fashioned way, hand work.
The largest part of the base was filled with storage bunkers, or igloos as they were nicknamed. In total, 802 were built.
2,200 square feet apiece, 2 to 3 feet thick concrete walls all around, and double rebar, insulated under the earth. Inside every one of these bunkers was as many as you could imagine, bombs, ordnance of all kinds. These things were packed to the gills. These bunkers were constructed impeccably. And the worst you'll see out of any of these after 80 years in existence to this day is minor cracking.
The first shipments arrived in late 1942, well before the site was fully completed. But with war raging abroad, across the country, sites like this were put straight into use.
We had military personnel, we had the advanced technology. If you can't back that up with the ordnance and with the weapons to sustain that fight that they knew would go on for a very long time, we would have been out of the game a lot earlier.
A permanent labor force had to be brought in to operate the facility. And from this, a new community soon grew.
To accommodate the workforce, they essentially had to develop a small town. There was accommodation for 1,000 people working here, a hospital, a school, a movie theater, a bowling alley.
But the call to arms also brought with it something unexpected. Across the country, age-old barriers were beginning to break down.
Reports show that there were 160 Native Americans working in this space. And there was also a strong presence of the WOWs, women ordnance workers.
Most of the men were out on the front line fighting. Migrants from all over the country actually also filled those roles. And it's a shame that it actually took a war to bring about that kind of change, but this was a turning point in that history.
However, social change at sites like this came at a price. For those working here over the years, danger was ever present.
In 1946, a forklift driver punctured a 100-pound bomb filled with white phosphorus. It then engulfed over 38,000 bombs in flames. For the next 20 hours, Bombs were going off with white phosphorus, as well as shrapnel being continually spat into the air.
Sadly, this wasn't the only tragic incident that happened in this era.
When you're storing these extremely dangerous materials, accidents can happen.
One morning, 4 men were working inside one of the bunkers when there was an explosion which blew the whole roof off. The walls were shattered, grenades were sent flying in all directions. 3 of the men tragically died, but remarkably, one of them managed to survive.
In 1950, this site was suddenly thrown into action once more. The Korean War saw America calling on its stockpiled ordnance. And this time, Black Hills was ready.
War played a key part in the United States history of the 20th century. So often we think about the battles, we don't talk about what was happening here on the home front.
Hidden sites like this remind us of all the effort that goes into that in order to be able to fight these wars successfully.
After 25 years of service, the site would close. The bunkers were emptied and left to the elements. But far from remaining silent forever, something new is drawing people back here.
There's really 2 reasons why people want to be here. One is because there's a huge desire to just be off-grid and living a simpler life in a way. The other reason is this facility is amazing for disaster preparedness because these bunkers will protect you from just about anything.
In 2016, a company called Vivos bought up around 575 of the bunkers.
So this is my bunker, home away from home. It started out very modest and very empty and basic, just like the other ones you've seen, but this is what can be done inside here. I have a large solar panel outside. That's my primary power generation. We have water purification up front, and we have, casually, just a nuclear biological chemical filtration unit on the other side. Back here we have fuel storage, and this is your ladder to get up into the attic. If you were to be locked down in here for a year or even more, you need all the storage you can get. Back here we have nice large gun safe.
For the Black Hills site, this latest chapter in its story is bringing back something that was lost a long time ago.
Like many communities that are built up around military investments, once the facility closes, people move away. Slowly, this community is beginning to reappear.
For full-time residents like Tom Soulsby, like-minded neighbors were an important factor in deciding to move here.
This place had 2 things that other places, many other places didn't have. It had a good amount of isolation from large population centers and almost in conflict with that, community. It's a community of people who are very much in agreement on how to treat each other and how to coexist and help each other.
And help in this unique town comes in all shapes and sizes.
It's really all kinds of people. We have people with very high-tech medical equipment, entire arsenals of weaponry, people with basically all the seedlings that you could need to start and run a greenhouse that could feed a community.
We're full-time residents here. There are about between 30 and 40 other full-time residents here right now. From our perspective, this is home.
While bunker life isn't for everyone, these old structures continue to hold their own in the modern world.
I have a good number of friends that I've known for a long time, and they were curious about what I was doing until the pandemic. They are suddenly incredibly interested in putting themselves in a better position where their pantry won't run empty in 3 days. If things did go crazy in the world, if someone straight up declared war on America or there was enormous civil unrest, I feel completely safe here. I can provide for my power and my water. we're good.
Today, the bunkers and the other parts of the site help illustrate how the country's past has left its mark on the land.
In the 40s, war was totally different than it is today, and this was a necessary facility back in those years. In a way, I'm glad it ended because we don't need this no more, and it's sad to see all the buildings falling down. It's just a part of our history that we can't change.
In the foothills of the Appalachians is a quiet site that became famous for the wrong reasons.
We're in a rural part of Tennessee, kind of far away from any place that you would really want to be by foot or car.
A winding road cuts through the range, ending at a walled fortress.
It's built out of a light-colored sandstone, and with its crenellated tops, it looks rather like a castle. It's very out of place in the area.
This place is a mishmash of architecture. Some of it is modern, there are older structures. Clearly, it has been built and rebuilt over the years.
But inside are rotting walls and rusted bars that reveal its true purpose.
It's absolutely depressing. You know that prisoners inside this prison had horrific existences.
This is Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary. Some of America's most dangerous criminals were locked inside here. Teddy Bassler arrived here nearly 40 years ago. His job? To keep convicted felons under lock and key.
This right here was key control. It's a federal offense, you can't own that key. If you had a whole set of these keys, I could get in and out of every prison in the United States.
Behind these doors were murderers, violent criminals, and sex offenders.
Stand here and every fiber of your being will scream, this is the end of the road.
But this high-security facility started life as a simpler structure.
In the late 1800s, Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary was a wooden prison. But in the 1930s, authorities decided to put the prisoners to work to rebuild it, basically ensuring that they would not be able to escape.
Brushy was designed to be a threat. To be sent here, you'd either been convicted of a heinous crime or no one else would have you.
For the inmates, living quarters were small and sparse.
You know, a bunk, mattress, blankets, pillows, drinking fountain, towel. That way, if you was using the bathroom, you just put your blanket up there. People were gonna come by and watch you using the bathroom. All inmates done was sit here, sit here, sit here. If he had a book, he could read a book. But now he's also planning.
Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary kept some of America's most notorious felons. But in March of 1970, Brushy's most famous inmate arrived. A man named James Earl Ray.
James Earl Ray was a fugitive from a Missouri state prison. He was a petty criminal. He's the dregs of American society. And he played a role in forever changing the landscape of America by killing Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
On April 4th, 1968, King was staying at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis. As he stood on his balcony, a single bullet struck him.
The world stopped. Riots took place across the country. actually remember the day and how afraid I was of the National Guard when they came into my black community as a little boy. It stays with me like it happened yesterday.
A manhunt began. James Earl Ray was the #1 suspect. He was captured in London, England, and sentenced to 99 years in prison at Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary.
James Earl Ray cell, right here. He wasn't nothing special. He just murdered.
When we found out he's coming here, we had staff meetings here all the time. He was a major escape risk.
On a June evening, 7 years into his sentence, Ray made his move.
That evening, I'm eating supper, and the whistle started blowing off, and then it's, and I think it's 7 times. I told my wife, I said, oh, hell, Lola. Oh, my God, honey, it's a bad one. This is bad. It's when that man escaped, it's real bad.
We've had a lot of people over the years run off from out front or whatever. As far as I know, it was only that one thing went across the wall. There were 7 different inmates, and they built a ladder and they scaled a wall somewhere right here.
The inmates squeezed through a gap in the barbed wire, just 18 inches wide. And with that, America's highest profile criminal was on the run.
Any escapee is dangerous. He's extremely dangerous. He'll hurt anybody that gets in front of him.
With the nation's attention fixed on the prison, they had to act fast.
I had to call every employee. Every employee at the prison we would call in.
The media descended on the space, and people all over the country watched the unfolding of this manhunt.
They sent the FBI in here, and I know most of the people in the FBI are good people, but the ones they sent up here, if they've been handpicked to be total rear ends, they got them. They drove around at night in cars shining lights up in the woods, but you're not going to catch him shining lights up in the trees at night.
While the FBI swept the roads, Tucker and his colleague, Stawny Lane, planned an expedition into the woods with bloodhounds.
We called that night, and he said, we got a really good track going over here. Now, he said, I'm going to tell you something. If I call you anytime tonight on the radio and I say the word Shiloh, I got him. We're looking at him.
For 2 days, Brushy's officers and the FBI raced to find James Earl Ray.
When it come over the radio, he said, we've still got a good track going. He said, it's hotter than hell. He said, I'm sitting over here at Shiloh Church. Boy, my hair stood up all over me. He's looking at him. They done got him. He said, Shiloh.
The hounds tracked Ray to a spot in the woods. Later, the dog handler showed reporters how he'd discovered Ray buried in a pile of leaves. By the end of the 4th day, all the escapees had been rounded up, and their second stint inside was about to get a whole lot harsher.
Worst thing you can do as a guard is allow an inmate to escape on you. So that puts a bad taste in them. So when they finally caught him, everybody's thinking that they're going to punish James Earl Ray. But his punishment is being in his cell.
James Earl Ray was put into D Block. This was the bleakest place that Brushy had to offer. Those in D Block were put into solitary confinement. They spent 90% of the time on their own. Their food was pushed through a gap in the door.
Ray spent 6 months in here. A few years later, he was transferred to another facility. He died behind bars in 1998. Brushy kept going, but eventually it couldn't keep up with a growing prison population and shut in 2009. Former prison officer Teddy Basler now fondly remembers his time here.
Count my blessings every morning when I was working there. I got here, come here and went to work. Every day, if it's raining, I was in the drive. If it's cold, I was in the war. If it's hot, I was in the coop. I was home every night with my family. I think I was just born for this kind of work.
Today, Teddy's tours of his former workplace are a big hit.
Very few people come up here don't enjoy walking through brushy. It's not every day you can go to prison for a day and then go home that evening.
While this prison played its role in the aftermath of Martin Luther King's death, that tragic event had much further-reaching consequences for American history.
His assassination, particularly amongst young African Americans and other civil rights activists, created doubts about nonviolence and the hope for a better America.
He changed the face of American history. In many situations, those riot-torn urban centers have never bounced back from the destruction of 1968. So, in essence, killing of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a critical moment in the larger chronicalization of American history.
In the lush hills of wine country is a building whose disastrous end was shrouded in mystery for decades.
We're in one of the most beautiful parts of America, just north of San Francisco.
Wineries, golden hilltops, oak groves, and we come across this large structure.
This place was clearly something special, but it isn't immediately apparent what happened here to leave it in this state.
Found in a tranquil setting, together it all reveals something unexpected.
This place tells the story of one of America's most famous writers.
But the ruins show there was a twist in this tale.
What we're looking at here is the product of one man's dream. It all came crashing down in a single night of tragedy.
Today, these remains stand within the boundaries of a state historic park. Bern Lefson has been a docent here for 10 years.
This was the home of a very important, famous individual in U.S. history. This structure was the dream of Jack London, the most influential writer of his time. His books were read by people around the world.
Today, Jack London's books, like White Fang, Call of the Wild, they're not held in the highest literary esteem, but in his day, Jack London was a superstar.
Costing close to $2 million in today's money, this was intended to be the home of Jack and his second wife, Charmian.
He named it Wolf House.
Living here would have made you feel like luxury. But with all of the windows, one would also feel that you're part of nature, which was very important to Jack.
In 1911, the foundations were poured, and they hid a secret. They were strong enough to carry a 40-story building. The reason was down to the 1906 San Francisco earthquake.
It's estimated that between 70 and 80% of the city was destroyed.
London wanted to make sure that his house would not only be stable in an earthquake with a massive foundation, but also as close to fireproof as possible. He used volcanic rocks for the walls. Where he had exposed wood, he used redwood with the bark still on. And redwood trees are famously resistant to fire.
Jack London had intended Wolf House to be a lasting monument on his grand estate. what he was trying to establish here was a far cry from his adventure-fueled formative years.
Jack London grew up poor, on the streets, literally on the streets of San Francisco. He worked on sailboats, sailed as far as Japan, rode the rails back and forth across the country, and this was all by the age of 20.
At 21, he chose to follow the gold rush north into the Klondike.
He spent about a year up there, meeting all the various characters, talking to people, taking in the scenery, and it's out of that experience that the germ of his writing was really born.
London's novel, The Call of the Wild, in 1903 was a huge success, and it made him rich.
An affair, the breakdown of his marriage, and then a new marriage followed. By 1905, the now famous author was looking to settle down.
So little known about Jack London, he was actually very passionate about conserving the soil. And at that time in California, farmers were using chemical fertilizers and just basically farming the soil out and moving on to another farm. And his travels around the world showed him ways to farm in a better, more earth-friendly way. And that is something he wanted to share with the world through his work here in the land.
The couple bought up small areas of land to create their new property called Beauty Ranch.
This parcel here is the one that allowed them to physically move onto the land and become residents of their new dream together. This was really a mark of success for Jack. This was really the pinnacle of his dream, was to have a wonderful place in the country that he could farm with his wife and be very close to nature.
The small cottage provided lodging, but Wolf House was intended to be their true home. However, in August 1913, with the house nearing completion, the unthinkable occurred.
Jack was awakened in the middle of the night being told that the Wolf House was on fire. And when he got here, he noticed the whole roof was engulfed, and he knew there was no saving it. What's left standing is all that does not burn.
Contained inside, a fire had burned out of control before the alarm was raised.
The sad irony is the thick walls that were designed to keep fire out did not handle the fire that began within.
For decades, the cause of the fire remained a mystery. But in 1995, a forensics team conducted a study of the site.
We are in the dining room, and the fire was determined by scientific methods to begin right in front of that fireplace.
Rags soaked in linseed oil had been used to treat the interior wood surfaces. And it's believed that at the end of the day, those rags were left in a pile there.
They were able to actually confirm the spontaneous combustion theory. It was an incredibly hot day, and the sun beaming in the open window, hitting those rags, just heated them up until the point of combustion.
In this case, by the time anyone was aware the building was on fire, it was far too late to do anything.
Today, many question Jack London's personal and political views. What these sites offer, though, is perhaps a glimpse at another side to the famous author.
London was a fascinating figure in the history, not just of literature, but of ideas about conservation, about man's relationship with nature. And still, in some ways, there's a hint of that lingering around these ruins.
In the Four Corners region, where Arizona, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico meet, ancient structures hide an often overlooked part of this land's story.
We're out in the wilds here, striking and it's desolate.
This feels like such a quiet and distant place today. But you can see from all the remains dotted about that years ago, this was anything but.
Aged forms cover these grounds, but one stands apart.
It's the kind of settlement we associate with Mesoamerican native architecture, the Mayans or the Aztecs, or South America like the Incas.
This was once a thriving and populous area, but something changed and people began to leave. That's the real mystery here. Something must have happened.
This is one of the most important archaeological sites in North America, one of the most important in the world, and yet most Americans don't know much about it.
Dating back over 1,000 years, the structures here reveal an early chapter in the human history of this land. John Jahate is a member of 2 of New Mexico's Pueblo communities.
The skills that were involved here to create the kinds of structures that we see a millennia later, they are still here. This structure at one point in time was about the height of about 4 to 5 stories. This wall is at least 3 feet thick, that there are 2 external walls and then a center wall where rubble would be used because it has to support the surrounding or upper walls. That's why it has to be so thick.
The structure covers an area of around 2 football fields. And through years of excavations, it's been estimated it had around 650 rooms.
This is Pueblo Bonito, the grandest of the great houses built in this canyon.
It's not just the skill of the labor, it's the sheer physical work. They didn't have draft animals, they didn't have mules or oxen.
As far as the walls and the ceilings, most of this wood comes from at least 55 miles away from the Chusca Mountains and the Zuni Mountains. We have to also remember, all of this was done with human labor, as well as simply other simple tools, bone, wood, and stone.
We learn a lot from the evidence left behind, but at the core of this story is the mystery of what this place really was.
Originally a nomadic people from around the mid-9th century, it was ancestral Puebloans who began to settle here.
This is when the construction of this site really begins, and it continues for centuries.
Key walls of the site were constructed along the cardinal directions of the compass, while certain windows are aligned with astronomical events.
They were positioned around the sun to mark the solstice and the equinox. They had meaning and purpose.
This was an engineering marvel. Sites such as this really reveal that there was a long history in this land before Europeans came, and that it was sophisticated.
12 other great houses are found here, but this was just one area in a larger civilization.
There were around 150 of these great houses in the region, and they were connected by a road system. They were all part of the same society, a shared way of life.
This culture reached across large parts of New Mexico, up into Colorado and Utah and west into Arizona. This was a very dominant group.
For centuries, Pueblo Bonito flourished as the largest of these structures and the center of this so-called Chicoan culture. Dominating the site is the large central plaza, a clue to what this all may have been built for.
Most scientists presume that this was a place where all the people, all the community members participated either with trade or ceremonies, but they also kind of congregated to perhaps maybe celebrate or just have a feast or a fair that you would expect them to share something together.
The scale of the structure suggests a large population could have lived here, but something is amiss.
One of the things that we do not see here is what we call trash mittens or garbage. Why don't we have large evidence of large amounts of trash? That's why the accepted hypothesis is that only a small group of people lived here at any one point in time, and other groups came here either on a pilgrimage or of a way to visit this place.
Something that adds to this theory is the abundance of these large circular structures known as kivas, the largest of which has a diameter of around 70 feet and lies to the south of Pueblo Bonito.
It's suspected that perhaps it probably was able to hold the whole community at one point in time.
They would have been covered over, either as underground structures sunken down into the earth, or as roofed buildings with an access point on top, likely with a ladder to lead you down inside.
We see them throughout Chaco Canyon, as well as other extensions of the culture that existed throughout the Southwest. But it's a way that we can simply understand that the humans who created places like this had some existential constructs. They perhaps have belief in the afterlife, a belief in the spirit or the soul of a human being, that they made a conscious effort to incorporate that into their society.
While Pueblo Bonito could have been a site of pilgrimage or intended for ceremonial use, the kivas also represent something more, a link to the modern day. Only this time, any mystery surrounding their use stems from a conscious decision.
The current day Pueblos have these structures within our communities that we still use, that they are part of our rituals, our existential constructs. Kivas are ways of helping us understand that we are spiritual beings, but at the same time, we protect what we want to and simply not divulge completely everything.
Across 3 centuries, the structures of Chaco Canyon continued to grow in size and importance, but it wouldn't last.
There's a huge rock collapse in the corner of the site, but that happened long after the ancestral Puebloans were gone. Something else led to their leaving.
And it wasn't only Pueblo Bonito that was affected.
Around the 12th, 13th century, something happened. Something significant enough to change the culture, to change the approach to living across the region.
This thriving community just started to empty.
Theories covering drought, disease, violence, and religious change have been suggested. But for now, at least, the answers to exactly what this place was built for and why it ended remain a mystery. While the inhabitants departed long ago, the significance of Chaco Canyon and these sites remains.
Perhaps some of the first impressions that people experience is that it's abandoned, but it's really not abandoned as it applies to our Pueblo culture. These places are significant even today. They give us a sense of looking into the past, but it helps us understand who we are in the present, and then certainly who we are in the future.
For John, however, the lessons aren't limited to the descendants of this culture.
One of the important things we as humans can learn is what history is. It gives us a sense of place, where we belong in this greater thing we call the cosmos, this universe. Literally, we are just part of something and we are connected to everything. By learning about some of those components, we realize that we belong here and therefore we should take care of this planet. That's what we can learn by experiencing places like Chaco.
Abandoned structures hold the secrets of America's past. Lost in a sea of machinery, an aircraft that helped America reach new heights.
It has such a unique, special role in history that no other aircraft can lay claim to.
A sporting arena built in a county that didn't play by the rules.
We didn't have anything, much around here in the early days. You had to do something to survive.
And defenses near the Capitol hide a story that was nearly lost forever.
It was involved in the protection of the United States Capitol. But in a bigger sense, it was here to serve a mission to protect the world.
Scattered across the United States are abandoned structures. Forgotten ruins of the past, monuments to a bygone era. Each shines a light on the story of this land and its people. These are the secrets of hidden America. In the hot, dry lands near the border with Mexico is a sight to behold, and it hides a creation that helped America reach for the stars.
We're on the edge of the city of Tucson, Arizona, and right here is a pretty unbelievable scene.
We're looking into a vast spectacle of decommissioned airplanes on a monumental scale. This is the largest airplane boneyard on the whole planet.
And nearby is a site holding the select few that really made a difference.
This is like a greatest hits of aviation history. I mean, all the weird and most effective vessels kind of all in one place.
Stored out here in the desert are all manner of aircraft that were vital to innovation in the 20th century. They won wars, shattered records, and broke barriers. But out here is stored one of the most unique looking and interesting aircraft you'll ever see.
It looks like a bloated, monstrous whale, and staring at it, it beggars belief that this thing could ever course through the sky.
But looks can be deceiving.
This airplane is one of the most unsung but important aircraft of the 20th century. It made America's single greatest achievement of the 20th century possible.
The sheer size tells us that this was designed to carry some truly heavy cargo, but the real clue as to what this was for lies in the little bumps to the edge of the fuselage.
So what we're looking at here on the side of the airplane are two features that make it really, really unique. In simple terms, they're just basically hinges. The whole front of the aircraft would swing open just like a regular front entrance door to your house, and that enabled the crews to load the cargoes.
Regular cargo planes are loaded from the rear. This approach was a design headache. However, it helps identify what the plane was for.
So the reason is because of the huge diameter of the components they're putting in. They weren't able to get them into existing cargo airplanes through the traditional rear entry points.
What it carried in that big belly, well, it had a huge impact on America. And what they were trying to achieve with this plane was uncharted territory.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
When President Kennedy addressed Congress in 1961, it was clear the Cold War had boiled over into space.
But the space race was an expression of rivalry between the United States, between capitalism and Soviet societies under communism. And this was fought out in many ways, propaganda, sports, but most strikingly perhaps, who could get into space first, who could put a man on the moon.
America, however, was on the back foot.
The Soviets are worryingly ahead. They've put the first satellite into space. They've put the first man into space.
This was a huge challenge. Frankly, when he said it, the US was still pretty far from being able to achieve anything like that.
It was against this high-stakes backdrop that the Super Guppy was born.
Everyone's heard of the B-52s, the Spitfires, the stealth bombers, all the things that are kind of powerful and feared. And this is like putting like a trailer truck in the sky to haul things, which sounds less exciting. But when you really dig into the story, you realize that this changed history.
And here we are. This is what it's all about. It's as unique inside as it is from the outside. It's enormous. It's a structure unlike any other aircraft you're going to ever come inside of. The airframe fuselage is 25 feet in diameter here, and from flight deck to the tail, it's a 98-foot length of cargo deck that's 8 feet wide. So in comparison to a regular airliner at the time, or even a cargo carrying aircraft, it's probably better than double the volume.
Super Guppy's payload demanded an exceptionally large aircraft.
It wasn't designed to carry just any cargo. Its mission was very specific. The Super Guppy was purpose-built to carry rocket modules for the Apollo program to get us to the moon.
The deadline for reaching the moon was set, the end of the decade. Time was the new enemy.
One of the biggest hurdles was logistics, especially transporting the components from the West Coast manufacturers to the East Coast, where the launch sites were actually to be found. They were far too big to transport by road and rail, and if you went by ship, it would take 18 days.
Jack Conroy, a former Air Force pilot, teamed up with businessman Lee Mansdorf. Their vision was to build a plane large enough to carry some of these components.
He realized that if you could transport them, you could cut that waiting time from about 2 weeks to 24 hours, and that would give America the crucial upper hand.
So of course, anything that's being done in a hurry for the first time, it comes with risks and it comes with challenges. We were modifying things that hadn't been designed to be modified, and it could have ended very badly at any point in the program.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. To be sure, we are behind, and will be behind for some time in manned flight. But we do not intend to stay behind, and in this decade, we shall make up and move ahead.
By the time Kennedy made that speech in 1962, Conroy had been working on his prototype design of an oversized cargo plane for around a year.
After he came up with his plan, Conroy made general inquiries with NASA. Now, he didn't get a contract, but he did get enough of an enthusiastic response that he decided to go ahead with his plan.
Conroy basically gambled it all. I mean, remortgaging his house, taking out multiple loans, and there were no guarantees from NASA that even if this worked, they were going to use it.
Now, Conroy's first version, known as the Pregnant Guppy, was ready to test.
September 19th, 1962, first test flight. Confidence was the opposite of high. They called the police department, fire department, told everyone to stand by.
Like any innovative first, it attracts an audience, and it attracts a certain amount of doomsayers and doubters, and the Guppy's not unique in that respect. There was a lot of white knuckles and crossed fingers and hopes that it would do what it was designed to do.
But to everyone's surprise, it was a success, and before he knew it, he was flying to NASA.
A year later, the Pregnant Guppy flew the second stage of NASA's prototype rocket to Cape Canaveral as part of the Apollo program. However, to help get a man on the moon before the end of the decade, they would need another plane, and they needed
to go bigger.
The Super Guppies had their airframe genesis, and these two airplanes behind us, basically these are derivatives of a civilian B-377 Strato Cruiser, which was an airliner. The airliner was such a successful model that they were converted for military use as a cargo carrier and ultimately a refueling aircraft. And it was really well built, and it was just the right sort of rugged basis for the Guppies' creation.
Designed to transport the third stage of the Saturn V rockets, it needed to be both longer and wider than the original Guppy. Built from 3 B-377s and 1 military variant, the fuselage of the original airliner was extended by 31 feet. At the same time, the 25-foot diameter upper section was built above.
They framed up a construction gantry, a grid, and built the airframe from that waterline up in a great big arc to the crown, and then skinned it and built it forward. And until you get everything locked together, you don't have the rigidity and the strength. It's a delicate balancing act, and it's a real testament to not only the engineers, but the fabricators who pulled this off. This was really a custom bespoke job. It is absolutely not the normal way of building a plane.
Before the Super Guppy could be thrown into service, though, it had to pass a series of tests. Here, an obvious issue that also impacts later versions reared its head.
The most notable feature of the Guppy is its massive size, its huge diameter. Well, that doesn't make it very aerodynamic. You're really pushing a brick through the air, and that's a real challenge.
In flight, it made some terrifying noises. There were real fears that it might just break up mid-flight.
One of the test engineers reported that he'd walked into the fuselage during the test flight, and he said it was like staring into a willow basket in a windstorm.
Nevertheless, with no failures so far, on a clear September morning in 1965, she took to the sky once more. And this time, the fears turned into reality.
Now it's time for the final test flights, and you get the easier ones out of the way first. So this was one of the hardest ones, a dive from 10,000 feet at high speed. Suddenly there was this loud explosion. Someone said it was like a bomb going off, and then the whole plane started to shake violently.
As they passed the 275 miles per hour mark, the pressure on the fuselage became too great, and it suddenly imploded.
Above the cockpit, there was now a 23-foot wide hole.
The plane was now speeding towards the Earth. The crew had no option but to try to regain control.
They are wrestling to keep this thing in the air, and this is them fighting for their lives.
Eventually, the Guppy was steadied, and the crew were able to land it on a dry lake bed. Disaster was averted, but it was close.
The Super Guppy went in for repairs. Reinforcements were added. And soon enough, she repeated the test and passed with flying colors.
So once the Guppy had cleared its flight trials and got its acceptance from the FAA, it went into service immediately in support of the Apollo mission programs, moving Saturn rocket components across the country to Cape Canaveral. Before the end of the decade, it had covered almost 1 million miles carrying its important cargo back and forth.
On July 16, 1969, Apollo 11 was launched. 4 days later, the astronauts entered lunar orbit.
In addition to flying the major rocket sections for the Saturn rockets, this particular airplane also carried the Eagle moonlander and the Columbia Command Module.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
This was a huge propaganda coup. It communicated to the world that America was more resilient, more powerful, more innovative than its Soviet rivals.
It's really safe to say that without this particular airplane, the United States would not have achieved its objective of putting a man on the moon before the end of the 1960s.
Four upgraded Super Guppies were later built, but the original remained in service until 1991, when it joined the Tucson Boneyard fleet. Some planes are stored here temporarily, others are used for parts. NASA felt this one deserved something special.
NASA was very conscious of the historical significance of the Guppy at this point, and they approached us here hoping that we could preserve it in public display storage versus being in secure storage at a military facility, and we were, very eager to help them out with that.
Soon moved here to the Pima Air and Space Museum alongside other aircraft of historical significance. Ownership was handed over in 2015, and the Super Guppy is now a permanent fixture.
Every one of these airplanes is animated by someone's memory, by someone's connection, by someone's personal involvement with it. And the Guppy is unique amongst them in its role and significance to history.
When you look at it, you really got to stand back and give it some credit, Without it, I don't think we have a moon landing in July 1969. So, thanks, Super Guppy.
In the Tar Heel State is a town where a farming community made their own luck.
Tar Heel is a derogatory term saying that people have dirty manual labor jobs, but it's one that the people of North Carolina have owned for themselves. As the saying goes, if God isn't a Tar Heel, why did he make the sky Carolina blue?
In the county of North Wilkesboro, history pivots on a battered circuit of asphalt.
Clearly, the stands have weathered over the years, but the concrete is still sound. However, there are boxes that are falling over.
The track itself is littered with weeds and grasses that are growing through the asphalt, but it still isn't hard to imagine cars whipping around this 5/8 of a mile track and making your head spin.
To many residents of Wilkes County, however, this track is home.
Just about most of the people has been here involved in the Speedway in one way or the other.
And the downfall of this place would lead some to take drastic measures.
That's all you could do was survive. You just couldn't get ahead without something else.
Dean Combs's family moved to Wilkes County in the 1940s, in the aftermath of the Great Depression.
My mama, she was a green bean raiser. Had an uncle, he grew the pigs. Another one, my mama made buttermilk. She made milk. She had 3 milk cows. I don't think people got governor help back in those days. Just manual work is basically what it was, manual work.
Farming communities like Wilkes County were slow to recover. Some families supplemented their income by making and selling moonshine.
It was those that did it and those that lied about it. Most people did it to feed families, This was a farming community and they're wanting a lot of money to go around, and moonshine was a way of life.
My dad, I really didn't know that much about his operation, but the understanding that I got, he mostly had distilleries built and had other people working for him. That's when they got their extra cash. They get extra cash in, they could go out and sell a little moonshine or whiskey here and there, and they could get a little more money and build up.
And like in so many places across the U.S., where there's moonshine, there's stock car racing. In 1946, they laid ground on a track that would one day become legendary, the North Wilkesboro Speedway.
Just unreal for anybody to see a race. They saw maybe people going up and down the highway roads, the dirt roads, back in those days. Local people that worked together, that just, It kind of created a bond between people.
The first Speedway was a dirt track with 4 banked turns. And back then, stock car racing was something else.
In the early 1940s, stock car racing was a little haphazard. You had different competitions all around the country. You had different tracks. There really was no regulation.
Stock car racing was still something that was done on the weekends by local moonshiners and people who were just enjoying modifying their cars to make them as fast as possible.
But the new Speedway would have a profound impact on the future of the sport. In 1947, its opening event was promoted by a businessman from Washington, D.C., a former racer, a man called Bill France.
Bill France came along and realized the potential of this hobby, and he thought he could make it into a sport. So he held a race at North Wilkesboro Stadium to prove that this could not only be a viable sport, but one that will bring out thousands of people.
The bleachers were standing room only. The race was won by future legend Fonty Flock.
It was a smashing success from the get-go. They expected 3,000 attendees. Instead, they got 10,000.
Following the success of North Wilkesboro's first race, Bill France established the National Association of Stock Car Auto Racing.
Most of your NASCAR fans are blue collar. Hard working every day, 8-hour people or farmers or whatever. That's the one that fill the stands.
Any NASCAR event is going to bring a big spectacle. It is the place where people go to connect with their neighbors and their friends and watch something that is important to their culture, their heritage, and their history.
The start of the engines, the engines, the old loud cars, you hear them up and the speed and the competition that was there, it was just so exciting.
At 23 years old, Dean Combs made his debut on the starting line.
But then I was just, kind of sitting here just to think about it, just the way you just kind of tense up and butterflies. You'd think you got to go to the bathroom. You think you have to do this. You already buckled in the car ready to go, and it just leaves you. Just leaves you. When they drop that flag, it's over with. Because you and that race car is all should be on your mind.
NASCAR transformed how the North Wilkesboro Speedway operated. Now, tracks across the country all followed the same rules.
Play becomes sport when rules are established to level the playing field for all competitors. NASCAR established rules for stock cars and how far you could modify them, and established the first rule book. But for a lot of race car drivers, rules are just suggestions.
This was scales where they weighed the race car with. In other words, they had a rule that you had to weigh no less than 3,700 pounds. Why? Why is because you can think about weight. Weight is basically horsepower. The lighter you run, the faster the car is going to run versus the same horsepower.
But at the North Wilkesboro Speedway, the tricks of the bootlegger were brought to the racetrack.
Stock car racing has its roots in prohibition and people trying to escape police. If horse racing is the sport of kings, NASCAR is the sport of outlaws.
Lead in the wheels when they go across the scales in a race, they'd have the other wheels on. Everybody worked to try to get lighter.
So your race teams are doing everything they can to modify their cars to bend the rules and sometimes break them just a little bit to be able to give their car and their driver an advantage.
Everybody cheated, but you didn't cheat till you got caught. That was our theory. You don't cheat till you get caught. If you don't cheat, you're not gonna win.
But even a strict rule book can't completely eliminate the risks that go with stock car racing.
In 1957, at the WWII 160 race, the axle of one of the cars snapped. A wheel came careening off, bounced over the fence, and crashed into the audience, killing one spectator.
But you can see this wall right here. We got a cement wall. Back then, it was just boards. It was like 2x8 boards put in the ground with a post. That car just came through and lost the wheel. The wheel bounced and went up in the stands and went through that fence and landed and killed a person, you know, right down through there.
Fortunately, such incidents are rare, and increasing regulation of the sport has made it safer. The accident at North Wilkesboro was an important prompter of those regulations.
But after the incident at Wilkes 160, the Speedway went from strength to strength.
Probably the proudest wins I have is then right here. When we went here, we partied. You know, I raced here, we'd have cookouts, we'd have whatever, you know, we'd enjoy it. And I don't see anywhere that I won that I enjoyed winning anymore here, be more proud than winning right here.
By the 1980s, the Speedway was hosting events to sell out crowds. Wilkes County had never had it so good.
The economy that it brought in, the people that came in from towns, you know, there was probably 3 or 4 just little old backyard stores where people stop and buy their drinks, buy this and buy that, and really helped the economy for them. And a lot of times they didn't have enough to sell them.
But by the middle of the 1990s, the county's golden age had ended.
You got to bring the spectacle. As NASCAR grew, older tracks like North Wilkesboro just couldn't keep up with the capacity and the facilities of the newer tracks. So unfortunately, by the 1990s, it wasn't used as much, and even local teams were looking for other racetracks to race their cars.
At the end of 1996, NASCAR stopped coming to North Wilkesboro Speedway, taking with it an economy that fueled Wilkes County.
You know, basically when the Speedway shut down, we had textile here, we had furniture, we had Lowe's Hardware was started here. The big Lowe's Hardware was actually started by Mr. Jim Lowe here, and he would be at the Speedway. And now, you know, they've all moved away. They're not here. You know, they're not here.
The North Wilkesboro Speedway has been silent for over 25 years. But some residents of Wilkes County have returned to an old occupation and even gone legit.
I've always set out to make a mild, strong whiskey that everybody would like and it wouldn't burn you. I've probably not changed the way I do it in the last 40 years. But I started when I was about 9 years old, and I'm be 76 next month. So do the math.
The moonshine culture is kind of having a revival, especially in this part of the country, and people have gone back to making it again. Some people collect stamps, some people make moonshine.
Near the nation's capital is a complex designed to defend America. But a classified operation there had consequences on a global scale.
This is one of the most important places in American history. It's the last turn in the Potomac River before you reach the nation's capital.
You have thick walls, places where there would have been gun emplacements. It's clear that the whole site was built with one purpose in mind: war.
However, this structure is not alone.
There's not one fort here, but 2. Directly across the river is another fort.
The defenses tell a story stretching across 2 centuries. But while designed for battle, their greatest contribution came from something entirely different.
And it's not the exterior defenses that would matter. It's what went on inside that was important. Stationed here was a top secret organization that the public wouldn't even find out about until this century.
Much of the classified story was revealed after an investigation began asking questions about a code name, P.O. Box 1142.
We were able to get a phone number for a gentleman who worked here during World War II. And when we called up, we mentioned the name P.O. Box 1142. It resulted in some silence on the other end of the phone. Finally, his question was, how do you know about P.O. Box 1142?
The U.S. was able to attain vital war information. The work that was done here was hugely important to the Allies' victory.
Straddling the Potomac River, the two forts and additional batteries here were built with one goal in mind. Vincent Santucci has worked with the Park Service for around 2 decades.
We are south of Washington, D.C., and Washington, D.C. is in the distance. And this fort was constructed specifically as a way to protect the American capital.
Completed in 1824, the oldest remaining structure is Fort Washington. But it's only here because an earlier fort failed to protect the capital a decade before.
With tensions arising in Europe, America feared war, so it began to fortify almost every key seaport with new batteries and new defenses. No seaport was of as big an importance as this one.
The concern would be that the British had a tremendously well-recognized and respected Navy, and the Potomac would afford a route right up to the doorstep of the American capital.
Completed in 1809, the original fort was far smaller than the one standing today, with tall earthen walls and a stone tower to house cannons. But during the War of 1812, the fort failed in its duty.
The view from this point on August 24th, 1814, would be looking to the north and seeing the glow of the fire in Washington, D.C.
Instead of sailing up the river to the capital, the British had chosen to land further to the east.
They marched to the city and they set it on fire. This was a huge blow to Americans strategically, but also to their morale.
Next, the British were heading here.
The fort was undermanned, underarmed. They used the last of their remaining gunpowder to blow up the fort, making it essentially unusable to the British.
The British occupation soon faltered, but it was painfully clear that strong defenses would be vital to safeguard America's future.
It was such an important strategic location, they decided to rebuild on the same site again.
Fort Washington was just the beginning. The upgrades around this area continued over decades.
Not only were the defenses of Fort Washington rebuilt and strengthened, but many years later they decided to build a second fort directly across the river.
The new structures, however, never saw conflict. But in the 20th century, they'd be called upon to defend America in an altogether different way.
The protection that was done here during World War II was not just to protect the capital, but it was a more global outreach to protect the world.
While both forts had been decommissioned by this time, in 1942, they were brought back into the fold. Fort Washington housed the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps. Fort Hunt was requisitioned for a clandestine operation.
The guns had long been removed, but it became important for something else. The top secret organization known only by its mailing address, P.O. Box 1142.
In the early 2000s, the National Park Service began to research the use of this site during the Second World War.
There actually were quite a few buildings throughout Fort Hunt Park that were part of the U.S. Army's installation here. But most of that is gone, torn down directly after the war.
Few structures remained. There was little surviving documentation. The team needed to find a new source of information.
It wasn't until we had one of our park rangers out providing an interpretive walk and talk for visitors, and somebody in the audience raised their hand and said, "Hey, I know somebody that used to work here. Would you like to talk with him?"
What followed was a 5-year project involving extensive interviews with around 75 veterans that worked here.
We began to uncover a much broader story of activities that were going on here. But the primary program has to do with the military intelligence interrogation program. Largely, it was trying to obtain information and intelligence from German prisoners.
Listening to the former workers and analyzing the few surviving photos, Vincent Santucci has formed an idea of what it might have looked like back then.
One of the most interesting aspects of Fort Hunt, which is no longer here any longer, are 2 prisoner compounds. So the center of the compound would be the prisoner cells, and it would be surrounded by a gated area where they could get out and exercise outdoors. These 2 large prisoner compounds would be completely fenced. There would be guard towers.
There were more than 500 prisoner of war camps across the U.S. But this site, on the edge of the Potomac, was something different.
Being close to Washington, D.C. and the Pentagon was very handy. The prisoners that were interrogated at P.O. Box 1142 were high-ranking officers, so that they had the propensity of having more important intelligence that could help the United States effort.
Intelligence gathering from the various types of camps proved vital to the Allied war effort. Listening devices were installed. Undercover agents were planted. And here, it's possible that a key German site was first identified.
The most important service that we performed, at least I did, and 2 or 3 others, by listening to 2 naval officers, we discovered Peenemünde.
Headed by Werner von Braun, Peenemünde was a key part of the Nazis' missile and rocket program that ultimately wrought devastation on London and beyond.
They kept talking about it, especially this one pair, and the officer said, "Don't worry about it. We're going to win this war because," etc., 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 talking about Peenemünde again. And then I think this guy mentioned rockets. It's going to turn the war around completely.
To extract all they could from the eavesdropping and interrogations, the military had recruited some unlikely candidates.
Many were German-born Jews. They lived and grew up in Germany. They were impacted by the Holocaust. They fled Europe, came to the United States and said, "Give me a gun, I want to go back and fight the Nazis."
Where they ended up, however, was a long way from the front line.
Told him to sit down. I sat down. I said to him, "Your name, please?" He said to me, "Why are you asking me this? We went to school together." Isn't that amazing? He remembered me. He gave me all kinds of information.
The interviews suggest a wealth of valuable intel was discovered here. There are no reports of violence or torture being used, but occasionally, the prisoners did require some persuasion. Here, the older structures had a unique role to play.
With the most resistant German prisoner, when they finally realized that they weren't going to get any information from them, they would blindfold them, handcuff them, they would take them and they would put them in the back of a truck.
After hours of driving around, it was hoped they'd believe they had been transferred far away.
So the vehicle with the prisoner on would drive down to one of these doors and they would back it in and then bring the prisoner in and take them into a room where they take the blindfold off and the handcuffs, and at that point, out of the darkness walks somebody with a Russian uniform. Even the most resistant pro-Nazi prisoners usually cooperated better after thinking that they were going to go with the Russian.
Following Allied victory in Europe as part of Operation Paperclip, a number of leading Nazi scientists and engineers were brought to the U.S., including Wernher von Braun. Reports suggest he was held here, and by now, the approach to internment had evolved somewhat.
There was one position, it's called a morale officer, and the morale officer is the person who actually provides rewards to them. And so there's some great stories about taking people that cooperated into DC and buying items to send back to their family.
I couldn't think that my interaction with Wernher von Braun, I couldn't make it up. We start first buying food, the way I remember it. And then I said, what next? And they said to me that they would want to buy some underwear for their wives. I had 4 guys with me, 2 of them with leather coats, and 1 or 2 with terrible hats. That was an unreal scene.
Wernher von Braun went on to play a vital role in NASA's space program. Alongside him, hundreds of other scientists and engineers had come through here. In total, almost 3,500 prisoners were questioned at P.O. Box 1142. But by the end of 1946, the camp had completed its work. The structures were bulldozed, and documents mentioning its name were burned. Sworn to secrecy, the sacrifices of those who served at P.O. Box 1142 came close to being lost forever.
You know, we had dozens and dozens of new grandfathers that allowed us to come into their living room, and that they entrusted us to come in with cameras and audio recordings, and for them to tell a story that they'd never told became very personal. There were lots of tears shed by everybody, including park rangers, when these men were able to finally share their stories with their families and others.
Given my background, it wasn't that easy to be in the presence of a German officer, and quite frankly, it was unpleasant, to put it mildly. I mean, I'd almost feel like vomiting for the very simple reason I had to be nice to these guys.
But having gone unrecognized for decades, the work of all those stationed here was finally commemorated in 2007.
We dedicated this memorial to the veterans of P.O. Box 1142, and part of that ceremony was to raise the first flagpole that's been raised since the Second World War. These men said that the way that they felt honored and recognized made up for the 65 years of being forgotten.
Abandoned structures hold the secrets of America's past. A House of God reveals how salvation was beamed into every living room.
During that time, to broadcast a crusade in prime time was a revolutionary idea.
A towering structure explains who really built Motor City.
They were typically hired on the spot to work on the Ford assembly line. This was very much known as the Ellis Island of Detroit.
An arena shows how a red-blooded sport became a catalyst for civil change.
Sputnik Monroe would wave for all the people up there, come on down here, come on down here, come on down here, and they would do it.
And one mansion tells the tragic story of a man who transformed Manhattan.
There's a lot of controversy on how his hand could have shot him in the head. So that's why they were thinking it might have been a murder.
Scattered across the United States are abandoned structures. Forgotten ruins of the past, monuments to a bygone era. Each shines a light on the story of this land and its people. These are the secrets of hidden America. In the heart of the Bible Belt is a city with a surprisingly Art Deco downtown.
Tulsa experienced two huge oil booms early in its history, and because of that reason, there's a lot of prosperity in the downtown area. And it is an area where Protestant evangelical Christianity reigns supreme. In fact, there are churches on nearly every street corner.
But one building here stands out, seemingly unrelated to the city's oil-fueled wealth or religious roots.
This building is an icon in Tulsa. A lot of people recognize it, and a lot of people think it's an eyesore.
The first thing you notice is it has no windows. Instead, it has these kind of gold-tinted diamond shapes all around it.
Is it meant to keep people from seeing in to what's going on inside, or to keep people who are inside from being able to see out?
It looks almost like a big Lego brick or something from a science fiction movie from the 1950s in which they're imagining what the future looks like.
Its unique design makes sense when you learn of its creator and his controversial master plan.
The man behind this building, much like the building itself, divides opinions.
What happened inside was revolutionary to American culture.
Millions of Americans would be personally touched by what went on inside this building, even though many of them would never step foot inside of it themselves.
Entering the building in its current state is not for the faint-hearted.
Inside, of course, it's pitch black because there are no windows. But once you bring a flashlight, you see this spooky array of tunnels and rooms. Everything's painted white.
But there is one floor that feels very different to the rest.
Wow. It's amazing how big this auditorium is. I mean, this is a massive, massive room. From the outside, you would never know that there's a huge auditorium up here.
Daniel Iskrig is an assistant professor at a local university and knows all about the history of this building. But until now, he hasn't been inside.
This room would have been filled with seats from this area here up towards the front, which there would have been a stage up there. I can only imagine this room packed with people and the energy of the singing and the organ and just the electricity.
Everyone had come to hear the words of one man, a preacher called Earl Roberts.
Roberts was a consummate showman, someone who could bring in thousands of people and hold them in a state of enraptured connection with God.
In his time, everybody knew who Earl Roberts was. This was a man whose fame extended far beyond Christians.
Here's a little boy who wants his eyesight healed.
Earl became a household name in the late 50s because of his pioneering exploitation of a new form of communication, television.
I didn't mean to hurt you, but God's Spirit came in my hand then. How many fingers is that man holding up? Four is right. Four is right.
Roberts was a real early adopter when it came to television. Ratings were pretty small at first, but as TV sales took off across America, so did Roberts' television show.
Roberts realized that these mass media broadcasts could bring hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people together.
To the miracle of television, you have been in our great 10th cathedral here.
The fact that there's Christian television today, that it's one of the primary means by which people receive the gospel, is a tribute to what he did so many years ago by putting the gospel on TV in prime time, and that the world, religious or non, could watch.
By 1957, his TV show was airing on over 135 stations. Earl needed a building to run what was now a national operation. In 1958, work began on his new HQ, the Abundant Life Building.
So here on the first floor was the destination for those who would come and to visit this headquarters. This particular area here was a giant mural called the Abundant Life mural, which was painted by a famous sculptor. He wanted to make this visitor center a place where people would come in and just be in awe of the magnitude of this ministry.
Earl's extravagant design choices reflected his unconventional interpretation of Christianity.
He encouraged his followers not to feel guilty about success, but in fact that their proper devotion to God would help them be successful.
For Earl, devotion meant donation.
A huge portion of his programming was fundraising. It was imploring his audience to make whatever small contribution they could for this greater cause.
The power of television meant the money came flooding in, and the Abundant Life building was specially designed to deal with the avalanche of cash-stuffed envelopes.
This freight elevator is one of the largest in Tulsa, and it's because of the amount of mail that was coming in. Up to 1 million pieces of mail came in and out every single month.
It could carry thousands of pounds of mail and packages up into the office portion of the building.
So here's the part of the building where they kept the donations that came in. Here's the safe here, and the safe room. There's literally hundreds of thousands of dollars that would come every month.
But it wasn't just cash in the envelopes.
The amount of people writing to Oral Roberts to receive prayer was just immense. You would have seen this large hall here filled with just rows and rows of desks of people typing out letters.
The building's lack of natural light was part of Earl's obsession with efficiency. He didn't want his employees gazing out the window. He wanted a well-oiled religious machine.
So there's also a number of prayer partners who were on duty all the time to pray, not only for the prayer requests that came in through the mail, but they had a 24-hour prayer line that people could call in. And so there was a room just for that with a massive phone system.
The Abundant Life building was designed as kind of a central nerve center of the whole Roberts organization. And in a way, you can almost look at it kind of like it was a data center or a server farm in modern technology.
The scale of this ministry is amazing. I mean, there were 7 different departments operating out of here. There were 600 employees who were processing prayer requests and mailings and publishing. It was a massive operation.
Earl reeled people in with his TV shows. His staff here then connected with them. The size of his captive audience was unprecedented in the world of evangelism.
I mean, ministry in general or churches are usually localized, but he found a way of taking his ministry and growing it exponentially.
In 1962, Earl's insatiable appetite for growing his empire led to ground being broken on a new and far bigger project.
Oral Roberts made a big impact, not only with buildings like this where he had his ministries, but also in the early 1960s building Oral Roberts University, 250 acres in South Tulsa with over 20 buildings and then a hospital and a graduate school.
After he completed his Oral Roberts University, he decided it was time to move his entire operation to that new facility. And the Abundant Life building went silent.
Earl's popularity continued to rise after he had moved on from the Abundant Life building. But in 1987, there was a pivotal moment when it all began to fall apart.
He called for his followers to donate more than $8 million to his university, or else God would call him home.
Some people really viewed Roberts as somebody who was so focused on the money-making aspect of his ministry that he was essentially a huckster or even a charlatan.
I think perception of Christians on television was changing, and so by the 1980s, the novelty of an Oral Roberts was wearing off, and so the more things he was doing, the more questions and skepticism was there.
The income from his ministry dwindled, and Roberts gradually faded from public life before passing away in 2009.
In the end, the legacy that Roberts leaves is a lot like the building in downtown Tulsa. Some people just don't know quite what to do with it. It may be an eyesore, it may be something that is connected to that town and people feel a lot of pride about.
But the Abundant Life building will always be a reminder of a time when preaching in America radically changed. On New York's so-called Forgotten Island are the haunting remains of a business empire that molded the city.
We used to call this the Psycho House because of the resemblance from Psycho from the movie. Like, we used to come here and just get close to the house and then get scared, run, take off.
The architecture is classic haunted house fare. The woodwork on the outside is all old and faded, and the beams are starting to lean over after years of holding up the weight.
The rounded balcony and needlepoint roof is a really common feature of this particular architectural style, but it really ups the creep factor of this house.
Within are artifacts of another century.
The inside is almost like a parody of a haunted house. The walls are covered in this material that looks more like flesh than wallpaper.
But one clue reveals the secret of why this house was built and how it was paid for.
In the living room is the centerpiece, the fireplace, which you would think there's nothing really significant about. But if you take a closer look at the bricks, you will see a very specific name.
This mansion once belonged to a multi-millionaire, one whose name is all but erased from history. On Staten Island is the former home of a wealthy businessman. Rick Rispoli came here as a child. Now, he's the caretaker.
This room was basically the main room of the house. It was used for entertaining, stuff like that. Back in the day, probably the high elites of the town and of the island back at the time probably all met here and hung in this room.
But at the turn of the century, happiness turned to despair.
This house has a dark, tragic history, unfortunately. In 1894, the body of a man was laid there with a gunshot wound to the head.
There is a mystery still to it to this day. If it was a murder or not, there's a little controversy there. If it was murdered, if it was a suicide.
The deceased was an heir to a business empire. His father was a man named Kreischer.
Balthasar Kreischer was born in a small village in Germany. Kreischer was also a businessman, and he would become a very successful one.
In 1836, Kreischer boarded a boat bound for New York. Just 7 months earlier, Manhattan's business district was in flames.
It started in a warehouse, and then because of the winter wind, it sort of spread and went everywhere. Now, there was a fire department, but most of the rivers were frozen, so that hampered their efforts. And the only thing they could do was to create a fire break by blowing up the buildings around the fire.
Hundreds of buildings were lost. New Yorkers lived in constant fear, but Kreischer saw an opportunity to make money.
Kreischer was drawn to Staten Island because of rumors of a treasure in the wetland dirt. That treasure was clay.
The Western Bank had copious amounts of clay, enough for Balthasar to build his fortune.
This is how the Kreischers made all their money. Right here with the bricks. Balthasar Kreischer came here as a German brick maker. New York City was burning down. He came here, got all the clay, built in his factory, built all his bricks, and helped build back Manhattan in the 1800s.
Clay presented an opportunity. The Great Fire only spread as it did because New York at that time was predominantly built out of timber.
Even at this early date, New York was a major metropolis with commodities everywhere and people packed in and buildings built right next to each other and out of timber of all things as well. So fires were inevitable, especially devastating ones like what they experienced.
Balthasar Kreischer built a factory on the riverbank.
And the factory was straight across the street, which was right on the waterfront here, was the whole factory, where they used to make the bricks and throw them on the boats if they needed to send it to Manhattan, up to New York City. He set up his own kingdom here.
Kreischer was so successful that eventually he was able to build Company Town. This town had everything, a fire service, religious institutions, and community places for people to gather. Eventually, it became known as Kreischerville.
Kreischer's bricks were used across Manhattan, helping ensure the city would never burn down again.
There are still many buildings in the city today that still stand that are made out of his bricks.
The business made Balthasar Kreischer a multi-millionaire. Back at Kreischerville, he built his family mansions.
There was actually 3 total mansions. Balthasar Kreischer had one mansion, which was behind this mansion up on top of a hill. And then he built this one for one of his sons, Charles Kreischer. And right next door, he built another one for his son, Edward Kreischer. It was identical mansions.
Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceilings. Oak staircases ascended from the vestibules. And an expensive material covered the walls.
Charles decorated the house and the foyer with some special wallpaper, as you could tell. But this wasn't wallpaper, this was a mixture of leather and linoleum called encruster. And because of the linoleum, it doesn't crack. So this is running over 100 years right now, and it's still in very good shape. This was the rich man's wallpaper back in the day.
Kreischer ensured that his sons and heirs were looked after. His legacy appeared to be assured.
He didn't know at the time, but one of his sons would eventually end up laying in the mansion, dead.
But about a year after the mansions were built, Kreischer died. The business fell to the brothers to run, and I cannot stress this enough, it was a massive undertaking. Hundreds of employees, moving the earth, baking it, transporting it to clients. I mean, it was a lot, but they ran it pretty successfully.
The brothers ran the family business for 8 years. But in 1894, Edward's body lay dead in his brother's mansion.
Edward, he went to work that day, 8 o'clock in the morning, was in a good mood, and his body was found about 10:30 later on that day, basically behind the factory, which is straight across the street. And then they brought the body back into this mansion, and then they called the doctors and stuff, and they pronounced him dead here in the house.
Historians agree Edward shot himself for reasons we don't know, though there are some who think that he was murdered.
There's a lot of theories because he was having trouble at the factory. His older brother, George, was put in charge of the factory after Balthazar died. Edward was still on with him. So he was bucking heads with George, apparently, and still to this day, it's still a mystery on who killed Edward Kreischer.
After Edward's death, Kreischer Brickworks continued for another 30 years. But in 1927, the business folded, and the mansions were sold.
The mansions changed hands several times. Balthazar's and Edward's house was actually burned down, so there was only this one house kind of left creepy right above the brickworks.
In the First World War, Kreischerville was renamed Charleston. The old mansion is one of the few buildings that remain of the engineering empire that helped build New York City. But in some corners of the town, the legacy of Balthazar Kreischer is still etched in stone. Today, no one lives at the old mansion, but dark tourists still visit the site in search of the macabre.
We do everything from drive-in movies to concerts to a haunted house, which, as you can see, this is one of our haunted house rooms.
Halloween is big business, and I don't know if it's because of, sort of Salem with the witch hunts and, kind of all these old houses and history that's around, but, the idea that you might be strolling and catch a ghost, we can't resist it.
We do paranormal investigations, and we do tours. So we're just trying to make it work. We're doing our best and seeing to keep it up little by little. We're fixing up the whole place. So we're bringing it back, bringing it back.
Near the midpoint of the Mississippi River, the stage is set for a battle for glory.
We're in Memphis, Tennessee, the birthplace of rock and roll and a place that Mark Twain once called the Good Samaritan city of the Mississippi.
On the edge of town is a circular building with a domed roof.
The structure sits in the shadow of Liberty Bowl Memorial Stadium, so it's pretty easy to figure out what this building may have been used for.
Inside the building today, it's a mixed bag. You're going to see ticket stubs, trash strewn all around. You're going to see the remnants of a once thriving place that had people screaming and yelling.
You're completely sealed off. There's no natural light. It's tremendously dark, except for a few bulbs that flicker here and there.
The stands have been empty for a long time. For locals, this building is an important part of their history.
When I got here, it was like a dream come true. You think you're on cloud nine. You want to tell all your friends to call, tell everybody that you're going to be at the Coliseum and stuff like that.
When this place was built, America was divided, but an arena for combat would become a cradle for unity. Jimmy Kimball has lived in Memphis for 40 years. He used to come here every week.
All the action started on Monday night. Everybody in town lived for Monday night. You know, they would get rowdy up to the point where they didn't get ejected. They wouldn't get thrown out of the building.
The crowds came to watch a violent spectacle.
All attention would have been focused on what was going on at the center, a battle royale between two men.
This is the Mid-South Coliseum, the mecca for a bloody pastime, known locally as Memphis Wrestling.
Professional wrestling, it's about strength, stamina, agility, an incredible feat of showmanship and storytelling.
Back in the days, professional wrestling was made up of regional markets, and within those regions, they could make their own rules. And Memphis wrestling in particular was pretty intense.
Everybody a bloody mess.
It was a brutal style. It was all about taking things to the extreme. You had metal chairs, thumbtacks, barbed wire, even fireballs.
Well, it sounded like just a big roar because there were so many people in here, you know, you couldn't distinct what the sound was like, but it was loud.
But Jimmy Kimball wasn't watching from the stands. In 1977, he was introduced to the roaring Memphis crowd as King Cobra.
Oh, it was great, you know. Like, I finally made it. Because when I started wrestling, I never thought I would be here.
Usually there are two combatants in the ring, the good guy and the bad guy, or what's known as the heel. And they are trying to get the audience to either cheer for them or even boo for them, but really get them riled up and excited.
I was always a good guy, and that would get the adrenaline going to make you do better, to make you perform better. You hear the people cheering and kids wanting autographs and signing autographs and shake hands, pats on the back.
Wrestling was an opportunity to let off some steam, but the Coliseum had an even more fundamental impact on the citizens of Memphis. The story began in a jail cell with a wrestler called Sputnik Monroe.
Sputnik Monroe was one of the biggest names in Memphis wrestling. A guy with a shock of white through his mostly black hair. And this dude really put the act on heavy. He used to say, hey, it's hard to be humble with a body that women love and men fear. One day, Sputnik was arrested for being in a bar for colored people, as the term was used at the time.
Segregation was still on the books. And remember, we're in the deep South. We're in Memphis, Tennessee. And here's a man going against the grain in every possible way.
But this wasn't Sputnik's first offense.
Sputnik Monroe would regularly challenge segregation laws by attending African-American bars and reaching out to the patrons of those bars and even giving them free tickets to the shows.
I met Sputnik when I was wrestling, and it was like I said, it was in his career, and he was refereeing down in Mid-South. He kind of took me under his wings and told me stuff that would make me better. Sputnik would go to the black clubs and drink with the guys and stuff like that, and that built up a good following with him, and they would all flock in to see him wherever he wrestled because he was buddy-buddy with them.
Sputnik's arrest made local headlines. The case went to trial.
He did what Sputnik would do, which was an act of defiance. And how can you upset these other white racists even more? You hire a Negro attorney. Go figure, the man was brilliant. He was brilliant.
Sputnik lost the case, but his actions made a statement. At the same time, the city was planning the Mid-South Coliseum.
In the 1960s, they begin drawing up plans for the new stadium, which is going to be the home of wrestling, but also a stadium for basketball and music concerts. And one of the questions they tackle in these designs is where they're going to put the African-American fans.
Venues like this place and others were definitely segregated. The black folk all had to sit in the balcony seats, possibly come in the side entrance, and not be treated equally as the white patrons at a venue.
But the Coliseum would be different.
When the Mid-South Coliseum first opened, it was the first racially integrated stadium in that part of the country.
Over the following 4 decades, the Mid-South Coliseum became legendary. And in 1989, King Cobra fulfilled a lifelong ambition here.
Oh, the night I won the World Championship, well, hey, that's on top of the world. On that particular night, I think I answered all the questions to all the critics.
This is largely an unknown venue. It's an unknown aspect of civil rights. It's an unknown story of interracial activity based off of the shoulders of a 235-pound man named Sputnik Monroe.
The Mid-South Coliseum was a place of unity in an era of division. But Memphis wrestling was about to face a bigger opponent.
In the 1980s and 1990s, professional wrestling was going through a big change. The smaller markets, the more regional markets, couldn't keep up with these bigger brands that had deeper pockets. Unfortunately, smaller markets like Memphis just couldn't keep up.
As local wrestling faded, the crowds stopped coming to the Coliseum. And in 2006, it closed its doors. Today, the Coliseum is silent.
Well, it kind of saddens me to see it in the shape that it's in, but the building is in good shape. It'll never be the same, but I hope they keep it going because I have a lot of fond memories.
Now it stands as a monument to Memphis wrestling and legends of the squared circle, like Sputnik Monroe, who in 2006 passed away in his sleep.
We know about Hulk Hogan. We know about Macho Man Randy Savage. You know, we know about countless other folk, but we really need to know about Sputnik Monroe. In my mind, he's a hero.
On the edge of Lake Erie, in a quiet neighborhood, is the old gateway to Motor City.
We are in Detroit, Michigan, a city that in many ways built America and a city that has also famously and tragically declined over the decades.
In the satellite neighborhood of Corktown, this building stands above all others.
The most striking thing about this building is its sheer size. It's something you definitely expect to see in the center of the city, but not necessarily 2 miles outside of it.
The grand architecture continues inside.
This place is absolutely beautiful. I mean, the place inside is very ornate. There's grand columns and the arches.
For 3/4 of a century, the fate of this building and Detroit were tied. It's been empty for 30 years, but now there are signs of change.
Not long ago, this building was a decaying hulk. Today, there's a lot of activity here. Something's going on to bring this old building back to life.
Everywhere I go and I sit next to somebody and I tell them what I do, they have a story about this building. When you think about, Detroit is the Motor City, we were part of that original revolution. It's iconic and we want it to continue to be iconic in a number of meaningful ways.
Ashton Parsons first heard of this place from an article on the internet. Now he helps preserve its history.
The first time I ever came into this space, I couldn't believe how large it was. The scale is unbelievable. You can be read numbers and sizes, but the overall beauty and attention to detail, it's incredible.
The centerpiece is its domed ceiling.
What we're looking at is the top side of one of the 3 incredibly massive arches or domes. Each one of these domes is thousands upon thousands of tiles interlaced together to create not only a beautiful look, but some of the strongest domes that you could imagine.
But the expensive architecture is only a facade. This structure was built for a desperate need before Detroit earned the name Motor City.
Detroit had always been in a remarkable location for all kinds of economic activity. It started as a trading post for beaver pelts.
By 1910, Detroit was already a major city, known for its metalworks. It also became home to Henry Ford's famous automotive factory on Piquette Avenue.
Manufacturing in Detroit was booming, but to become a true powerhouse, the city needed a modern transport system. This is the Michigan Central Station, connecting Detroit to the rest of the United States.
Michigan Central Station was meant to be both a cutting-edge facility to handle all this rail traffic, but also a symbol of Detroit's growth and strength.
But before the station was ready to open, tragedy struck the city.
In December of 1913, while the terminal was being built, Detroit's existing railway depot was severely damaged by a fire.
In an act of desperation, the new Michigan Central Station was opened early.
The Michigan Central Station was really thrust into an opening without any fanfare. It opened and they were ready for it.
Trains were going in and out of the new station with only a few hours' notice. This was a testament to the ingenuity of the people of Detroit.
Within a few months, thousands of travelers from across the United States poured through the station.
We're here in the concourse. You would have had offices upstairs, people walking to and fro. You would have had all manner of people coming in and out of their trains up this ramp, porters coming in and out with their bags.
By the 1920s, 200 trains would leave Michigan Central every day. But the palace of the locomotive would usher in the age of the automobile.
Henry Ford had introduced his revolutionary Model T automobile, and as demand for that car grew, so did Ford's need for workers.
The Detroit Board of Commerce contacted New York's Immigrant Reception Center and asked them to direct manual laborers into their city.
Tens of thousands of immigrants passed through Michigan Central Station and into Detroit, where factory jobs were waiting for them.
They would come here from all different walks of life, all over the world, and this is where they would come to. And so because of that, Michigan Central Station has sort of rightly earned the nickname the Ellis Island of Detroit.
Detroit's new workforce created Motor City. But by the 1950s, boom had already turned to bust.
As more people got cars, they didn't need to live in dense downtown areas anymore. And at the same time, the growing interstate highway system also made it easier to build automobile factories in other locations, especially in the South. All this meant that Detroit was no longer the center of the manufacturing universe. And employment began to fall, and its population gradually began to drop.
As the economy shrunk, so did the importance of this main terminal.
The last train left Michigan Central Station in 1988. For 3 decades, the building stood silent. But now, another Detroit crown jewel is bringing the station back to life.
So I've been on the project since March of 2020, and really my role is to deliver Michigan Central.
In 2018, the Ford Motor Company announced that it was taking over the Michigan Central Station. The company plans to take the neighborhood and turn it into kind of an automotive campus for research, design, testing of the next generation of automobiles, electric cars, autonomous vehicles.
We have really committed to bringing 5,000 employees down to Michigan Central. This main floor will be open to the public. So we really want people to feel welcome to come in.
The refreshed station will revitalize the neighborhood of Corktown and again be a jewel in Detroit's crown.
Instead of going to build something shiny and new, why not bring it back to life and build around it and support it and have it be that beacon as it always has been and the focus of the new.
Michigan's Central Station is to become a defining feature of Detroit once more.
There's kind of a paradox here. This is Motor City, the city that built the automobile and was built by the automobile, and yet the most visible symbol of the city is a train station. Bit of an irony there.
Abandoned structures hold the secrets of America's past. A stop on Route 66 reveals a forgotten story of this nation's mother road.
Whatever color, whatever race, well, we learn how to treat people with great respect.
A scorched landscape conceals a revolutionary entertainment complex.
All you wanted to do was run up the hill. I mean, for young guys, this was something you'd never seen before.
A pioneering waterside attraction symbolizes the rise of a great city.
This was a bold statement to the world. On the water, on the Atlantic Ocean, in this emerging town called Miami.
And one man's extraordinary feat of architecture speaks to this nation's pioneer spirit.
America's absolutely come here, live free, build your dreams. Anything is possible. I mean, have you ever seen anything like this?
Scattered across the United States are abandoned structures, forgotten ruins of the past, monuments to a bygone era. Each shines a light on the story of this land and its people. These are the secrets of hidden America. Two hours northeast of Los Angeles, in the Mojave Desert, lies an eye-catching collection of structures that are a slice of American entertainment history.
You've got this one-dimensional, pretty plain desert landscape, and then just this explosion of bright color. It's clearly a hotspot for graffiti artists because it's everywhere.
Graffiti isn't the only reason people visit today. Some people come for a higher adrenaline activity.
We've had a lot of people who've come through and trespassed, all had buggies, much like the ones behind me. And so that kind of is what sparked the idea.
With the Mad Max-style desert surroundings and all the graffiti, feels like the perfect place for it.
A proper racetrack is set to be built among the ruins. A new chapter in this site's storied history.
This site is historic for everybody in the area. Everybody knows what it is.
It was the first of its kind in the whole of America. But the good times didn't last.
Kind of makes you wonder, did something dramatic or sort of terrible happen that closed it? It's a little bit of a mystery.
The site owes its existence to a piece of infrastructure built years before.
It wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the road. I mean, it's the lifeblood of the place.
Interstate 15 cuts right through this area, and it's one of those freeways that has seen a substantial increase in traffic since its opening in the 50s.
You've got these absolutely massive billboards, and you can imagine the name of the park up there in huge letters, enticing passing traffic to stop and come in.
Steve Steiner was a teenager living in Los Angeles when he made his first journey here.
First trip, my buddy said, this is going to be something you've never seen before. He said, it's a long drive, but come on out. This was in 1978, and Billy was driving his little 1963 VW bus that did about 55 miles an hour on the freeway tops. So we left Long Beach, and 2 hours later, here we were, and it was like nothing I've ever seen before. It was a true oasis in the middle of the desert.
This is the Lake Dolores Water Park, the first water park to be built in America.
What you're looking at is a critical piece of American entertainment history.
But back in the early 60s when it first opened, it looked very different.
This area used to be a family campground. It was this lovely picture postcard, quaint sort of place.
This was first thing in the park, man-made lake. It's about 27 acres with about 5 acres of land. That's an island.
Dr. Apal is part of a group redeveloping the park.
Built in 1960s by a gentleman named Bob Byers. He named this lake after his wife, Dolores. So everybody driving on this highway, seeing this huge body of water would make them excited and want to come here and build memories with their families.
The lake was a huge hit, but Bob had dreams of something more and began taking the first steps in creating an attraction Americans had never experienced before.
The park's owner was thinking about different ways to make the space more popular, and a few simple slides that would fling people into the lake was just that sort of thing.
So the first slides were made of steel, and they weren't that long, they weren't that high, but they were hugely popular, a fact that was not lost on the owner and kind of got him thinking.
Bob realized this was the way to go, to make the slides the main attraction and to make them bigger and more extreme.
By the 1970s, Lake Dolores had come to resemble what we now recognize as a water park.
A lazy river, a huge slide that started at a crazy height. These are the hallmarks of the modern water park. And this was the place that kicked that whole trend off.
Steve can vividly recall walking through the turnstiles for the first time.
When I first got here, it was the parking and lots of cars. There was a lot of cars back then. And then it was a mass of people in water. Incredible. It was a Disneyland for water. They had 6 to 8 slides that were about 50 meters long, I would say. And they'd be doing 45 miles an hour, maybe 50, down this hill.
was kind of the Wild West. They did whatever they wanted, and I cannot be more clear, you would not see this today.
There was one slide that was undoubtedly the star attraction.
It's been a long time, but I believe we're at the site. One of the scariest things in my life was two chutes going down this way, 200 feet at 40 miles an hour, standing up.
So this attraction, this epic slide, is actually extremely dangerous.
Your first time down is the nuttiest thing because it's as slick as can be. And of course, I went down this slide, ended up down, caught it with a hand, and then kind of did a belly flop right into the water. Got a lot of laughs.
Yeah, I mean, you might be going around, you might get a little bumped, a little bruised, but you know, you would get up, you would dust yourself off and go again.
Towards the end, one of the greatest feelings of my life, I went down, everyone's looking at me, and I was able to spin all the way down the ride, all the way down to the end, and flipped, and actually made a nice flip. It looked great, never did it again.
Other parks soon took notice of Lake Dolores' success, especially in a well-known city nearby.
Being on the road to Vegas was sort of a blessing and a curse, right? In the beginning, great, brings lots of people. But Vegas being Vegas, you know, they also started building water parks, and they did them bigger, more extravagant. And, you know, in the end, Lake Dolores just couldn't compete with that.
A significant downturn in popularity forced the park to close in the late 80s. But in 1998, a $1 million makeover was complete, and the new park reopened under a fresh name, Rockahula.
It was coming back to life. They brought it back. There were rides there, red, white, and blue American representation rides. People were still starting to come in.
But less than a year after the reopening, tragedy struck.
It didn't pan out the way they had decided. There was an unfortunate incident. Certain rides that were still not regulated properly, they were grandfathered in from the previous era. What we know about the accident is that it was off duty, it was off hours.
So an employee, rumored to be under the influence of alcohol, decided to take a late night ride, went down a slide into an underfilled catch pool and had a pretty disastrous landing, severely injured, ended up being paraplegic.
The lawsuit that followed was just too costly for the park owners. They were forced to file for bankruptcy.
The park changed owners multiple times in the early 2000s, but only really operated intermittently, each owner struggling to keep it alive. The water park finally shut its doors in 2004, and it's never reopened again.
Without the desert groundwater being pumped to the surface, the lake slowly dried up. But the water park's abandonment paved the way for a new type of business.
I've been involved with the filming on this property for years, bringing film crews over, doing different commercials, movies.
John Miller runs a film location company specializing in the Mojave Desert region. But recently, trespassers gave him a new idea, a racing track for off-road vehicles.
What we did is we let the market tell us what it wanted from this area. Like, well, hey, if they're already coming here to do this, why don't we just build it for them?
An abandoned space like this in the desert would make a really cool racetrack. I could totally see dune buggy drivers having an amazing time in this incredible landscape.
These are the most popular off-road vehicles sold. The suspension on them allows you to do darn near anything that you want. Kind of allows anybody to go out there and be a racer.
As well as the racetrack, there are also plans for a virtual reality experience, an RV park, and a hotel.
For the first time in decades, the park now looks like it has a bright future.
Dr. Appel's priority, though, is to bring back to life the park's oldest and biggest attraction.
My own personal goal is by 6 months we will have water in this lake. And we will be welcoming everybody to come back here and enjoy it. This is still America's first water park, so we want to preserve that history.
The Lake Dolores Water Park began with one man and his dream to build something Americans had never seen before. Decades later, there's at least one person who remains grateful.
Bob Byers. He went out and just did this for fun for his family and then fun for everybody that came by here. And for someone to do that, it takes a lot of hard effort, a lot of drive. And he put pride into something that was just so amazing. And on behalf of everyone that went here, I really would love to thank him.
On the outskirts of Yellowstone National Park, deep in outlaw country, is a structure that celebrates the supreme freedom of the American West.
Wyoming is a state of natural beauty, mainly known for its vast expanses of wilderness, not for its interesting architecture.
Yet, there is a building here that's hard to ignore.
I've talked to a lot of people throughout the years, and it's an extreme curiosity. Nobody knows what it is, but they'll take every stab in the world to try to decipher it.
Strange-looking buildings often have fairly strange stories attached to them. This is no exception.
It was hand-built by a talented and ambitious man.
He was determined to build something extraordinary for himself and his family. You can see that it's been made with real care and skill.
This is sort of an alternative Western version of the American dream. His unwavering dedication to this building ultimately cost him his life.
In this rugged part of America, embracing the wilderness has a long and celebrated history.
The nearest town, Cody, was named after Buffalo Bill, the legendary hunter and entrepreneur, whose real name was William Frederick Cody.
20 miles west of the town is a structure that matches this wild and dramatic scenery. The Smith Mansion.
When I come driving down the highway and see the mansion up on the hill, you can see 5 miles down. I get excited. I can't wait to be here.
Sonny Larson is a mother of 2 living in Cody. But back when she was a child, the Smith Mansion was her home.
So this is the cold room of the house. It's a room that constantly has air running through here. This room we slept in during the summertime when it was warm. This hammock is what we slept on.
The ground floor was a wooden maze comprising of 6 different shaped rooms.
Okay, so here you are in the hot room. This is the hub of the house where we pretty much did everything. This was our only source of heat, and this was our dining room table. We spent our winters here, and we slept in sleeping bags and rollouts on the floor. We didn't have traditional beds.
Sonny sold the house in 2019 and hasn't been back since.
Coming back to the house now that I don't live here, I no longer own it, it's extremely emotional. It's just something that I'm happy to do, to be able to come back up here and see it.
The house is named in honor of its builder, Sonny's father, Francis Lee Smith.
This place actually speaks to my dad's character. He was what you would consider an old-time mountain man, and he was very eccentric. And you can kind of see that in the whimsical nature of this home.
This was a house that Francis Lee Smith was very passionate about. But actually, what ended up happening is it seemed to take over his life.
Before the project would consume him, he had one simple goal: to single-handedly build a house for his wife and children.
Okay, so my dad wasn't a very big man. He probably was 5'11". And after having the chance to work on this, I really didn't realize what kind of hard work it was. It's almost impossible for one man to do, but he did. So as he would bring the logs in here, he'd pull them down into the bottom part of the cold room using all these handmade pulley systems that he used.
Francis Lee Smith was a man of limited resources, but he knew how to maximize what he could get his hands on.
For instance, he used timber that had been fire damaged in the forest to actually build the base of the building.
He used the wooden floor from a high school gymnasium and other bits of random timber that you'd find around town.
He became laser-focused on the build, a fact his ex-wife, Linda Mills, knows only too well.
Lee worked in town at his regular job, normal hours, come home, and then he would work at the house, on the house, till like 3 or 4 in the morning. And this was day after day after day.
The marriage ended in divorce, and Francis Lee moved into the then one-story Smith mansion. This is when Sunny started spending half her childhood here.
We didn't have running water. We were minimal electricity. You know, we had an extension cord that we branched off from. We didn't have an outhouse. We lived wild with the animals. We lived like we were back in the 1800s, but it's something I wouldn't change for the world. I learned a lot. You know, it really made me a strong person.
The divorce proved to be a pivotal moment for the half-built house.
It started out as a family home, and then it took on a life of its own and just started going up.
As one floor became 2 floors, became many floors, became a separate section and another separate section. People didn't quite know what to make of it. You can imagine the questions around the town. What's going on now? Did you see what he did last week?
Above the living quarters on the ground level, 4 more floors were added, but never fully completed.
The second floor, which is right above that rounded roof, is inside the house. I think it was meant to be some kind of a master bedroom when it was finished. Once you get up to the 3rd floor, which has the second smallest staircase, that was going to be all enclosed with windows, just like the bottom floor. A lot of lookout points were going to be in this house. My dad loved to glass the mountains for wildlife. This big staircase takes you up to the 4th floor, and from there, there's ladders that take you up to the crow's nest. You can see clear end of both sides of the valley, a beautiful spot.
This building is an expression of its environment, of a love of the outdoors.
Out here in the wild west of America, one man going against the grain, expressing himself in timber and clever engineering. It's great to see.
I never would have thought it would look like this in a million years. It's beautiful.
Francis Lee was a maverick builder. His design decisions were all off the cuff.
Back in the 70s, when he started building this house, there weren't any rules that you really had to follow. So he ended up just doing everything his own way. Nothing is to code up here.
But Sonny's father's own way was dangerous, and one day he paid the ultimate price.
Unfortunately, my dad never wore any kind of safety equipment. On this northeast corner, he was building on a secondary roof system. He was using a 12x4 piece of plywood to measure with, and it fell and made him slip. He couldn't hang on, and he fell, and that's the end of it. He laid there for 2 days before he was found.
The phrase, "he died doing what he loved," is really quite apt here. He loved building that house.
Despite never being completed, the fact the mansion is still standing proud comes as no surprise to Sonny and Linda.
It's architecturally phenomenal. He was extremely skilled because he had all the math down for this building to support itself in ways that aren't normally done.
I know how this place was constructed, and I know it's going to be here for another 100 years. It might be broken down, pieces might be falling off, but it'll be here. Oh yeah.
For Sunny, this will always be a monument to her father.
This house is my dad, in every sense of the word. It's crazy, bold, it's beautiful.
For others, it echoes the attitude of the country's early settlers.
I think it's a masterpiece. I think this house represents true Old West grit and spirit.
A dilapidated building on a quiet stretch of Route 66 hides an incredible story of compassion during one of America's most troubling times.
Route 66 really is a piece of Americana. It has so many aspects to it, and a lot of it we really don't know, and this abandoned property fulfills a piece of that story.
It's got a pole in front that looks like it might have once held up a big sign, but the sign is gone, the building is boarded up.
This was once a life-saving stop along America's Mother Road.
For some travelers, this place was an important refuge. It was a place of safety in a world that could be particularly hostile and dangerous.
Attention came from the outside world, okay? From having to interact with people who didn't care about me. But when I was here, I was very well protected.
This is one of the sad and dark chapters in American history that we so often ignore because it goes against the ideals of our nation.
But amongst the horrors, there is a heartening tale of a family that went above and beyond.
We need to make sure that we educate the future generations about this wonderful family, fulfilling a need as a safe haven and during a difficult time in history.
The buildings here have sat derelict for decades. But Reverend Alan Threet remembers a far busier time.
When I was a kid, I remember being about 7 or 8 years old, coming out here to the gas pump right here, put gas into the car.
The gas station was opened by Reverend Allen's grandfather, who made sure his business reflected his personal values.
We would always try to take care of the customer, try to make people happy, because this was a service station of love.
The Threet story of hospitality began in 1921, during one of America's most disturbing events.
In the woods nearby, you can see the remains of a house that's now kind of collapsed. But once upon a time, this was an important place.
This is the home that my grandfather built to raise his family in.
Ed Threet and Reverend Allen are cousins and have heard tales of how this house became a refuge for people desperately fleeing the nearby city of Tulsa.
What happened in Tulsa should never happen to anybody. You know, it just shouldn't happen. But my grandpa, being the kind of man that he was, just opened his heart and let people come to stay here.
The event that people were escaping from was the Tulsa Race Massacre.
An African-American young man is accused of speaking inappropriately to a white woman, and ultimately those accusations will lead to a raid of a white mob upon the thriving and successful Black community of Tulsa, Oklahoma.
It was absolutely devastating In the end, something like 35 square blocks of the city were burned to the ground. The initial estimates were that about 36 people were killed in the riots, but later it emerged that the number might have been as high as 300.
These are stories that I've heard where our property, people were able to come and stay here and rest until they were able to find additional means to take care of themselves.
At the time, the Tulsa Race Massacre was underreported. The atrocities went largely unpunished, and simple parts of life for African Americans remained tough. Travel was one of them.
Traveling during the Jim Crow era for a black person was a very difficult experience. There's much more than what meets the eye. It's a complex situation that is filled with all kinds of dangers, from entering a building, from needing to get gas, more importantly, trying to go to the bathroom.
Reverend Allen and Ed's grandfather recognized this sad state of affairs and opened the Threet filling station in 1922. When the road here became part of Route 66 5 years later, it was said to be the only black-owned service station on the whole 2,448-mile highway.
This black-owned filling station was critical to the success of African Americans that traveled along the Mother Road. Imagine not being able to get gas at a white station, but if you came to this filling station, you were home. You could get gas and keep on motoring along.
As word spread of this unique gas station, people began stopping here for more than just gas.
There was a table here. People could sit around the table. Generally, they were playing dominoes or cards or something to that nature. And here there were booths and stuff like that. In this area over here, well, you can see where food will be passed through from the kitchen to different customers.
Anyone that is an African American over a certain age can instantly identify with the knotty pine that used to be in their family's club room, in their basement, part of Black America that makes you just sit back and smile and reminisce about the good old days.
At weekends in the summer, it was in the field behind the gas station where eyes were drawn.
This service station, they had what you call the Negro Baseball League. We had cars lined up all the way down the road about two or 3 miles.
Backstop was here, first, second, third base. We had bleachers along the side here. People came here to relax and enjoy themselves.
But this service station wasn't just a welcome stop for black motorists, but a potentially life-saving one too.
Just a bit down the road was the town of Luther, which was a sundown town.
There were literally signs that would say black people had to be out of town by sundown or else. And at a time when lynching was still prevalent in this country, the or else was serious. That was a real threat.
Next door to the gas station, the Threets offered an alternative nighttime experience.
The Threet enterprise became a gathering place for people in the community. They could come out on the weekends for barbecue and dances.
There was a jukebox in the corner up there. There was always music being played. Pretty much the floor in the middle was a dance floor.
The bar was called the Brown Bomber and was run by Ed's father.
I enjoyed every second that I was in this place. People knew who I was. They knew my dad ran this place, so there was a certain amount of respect that I got. My brother and I, every Friday and Saturday, we would barbecue ribs. That was sort of like our job. It was such a tremendous atmosphere, being around older people. I just enjoyed it. I enjoyed it immensely growing up here. Uncle Euless. He passed away in December 1956. She never came back up here again. That's when she had her bedroom downstairs. She ran the business, she kept it up and going. She did all of that while she was still a school teacher.
At the end of the 50s, traffic began to be diverted away from historic Route 66 to the new interstate highway. The Threet filling station was a vital sanctuary to African Americans throughout the middle of the 20th century, as the road to racial equality progressed painfully slow, and that journey is still ongoing.
10 years ago, I was the mayor of Luther, and I had a citizen tell me, "Don't let dark catch you in town." So you would like to think that things have changed. They haven't changed that much. They haven't.
We definitely are not at the finish line yet. There's definitely some good distance to travel, and if I could travel, I would travel with Threet family filling station folk, because historically, their family has embodied the right spirit that we need to move forward.
In Florida's so-called Magic City is a venue that helped announce its arrival as one of the country's newest vacation hotspots.
We are in South Florida at the mouth of the Miami River, and there's no more beautiful location.
Miami Beach is famous. Everything is about water, the sea, and the sun down here.
Right under the nose of Miami's residents lies a long-forgotten structure.
This is definitely a piece of statement architecture. It has a really strong, distinctive silhouette.
There are a lot of seats, and it just opens out into water. So you gotta think, this is a place where sports are happening on the water.
Ultimately, this place would prove to be more than a water sports venue.
Events you would not expect took place here.
The biggest surprise, though, would arrive 20 years after a disaster shut it down.
The assumption was that, oh my gosh, she's gone. She wasn't gone. Strong lady, strong lady.
In the early 60s, the city of Miami wanted to show the world it was on the rise. They invested in large malls, a new football team, and here on this small downtown island, the Miami Marine Stadium.
Miami Marine Stadium was the first purpose-built powerboat stadium ever built in the United States.
Commissioned in 1962, the stadium played a key part in giving Miami its iconic image. Longtime Miami resident Bill Talbert spent many afternoons here watching the action unfold.
I can remember sitting in those stands. The powerboats were just so incredibly exciting. There's 6,566 seats here, and there's not a bad seat.
The task to design this stadium was handed to a 28-year-old immigrant from Cuba called Hilario Candela. One of his first decisions was to pick a building material tough enough to withstand the salty sea air.
This stadium is still considered a modernist icon because it's made entirely from poured concrete. And at the time, it was the largest structure of cantilevered concrete in the world.
But construction of the stadium was not the only challenge. A track for the boats to race on was also needed.
They created a U-shaped basin that allowed boats to turn 180 degrees at high speeds. Some boats could go as fast as 100 miles an hour.
The dredging of this basin alone cost the same amount as building the entire stadium.
After more than a year in the making, on December 27, 1963, the stadium officially opened. And it put Miami firmly on the map.
When this was opened in '63, this was a sleepy little southern town. This was a bold statement to the world. On the water, on the Atlantic Ocean, in this emerging town called Miami, that, you know, we're a big-time town.
Spectators were fully immersed in the atmosphere, thanks to the stadium's design.
With this closed-in roof, the sound went up, around, and down. It was loud, 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 and exciting. It got you out of your seats.
If you were sitting close enough, you might get sprayed by the boats as they went zooming by.
But on the very first day, a tragic turn of events risked the future of the venue before it had even begun.
Unfortunately, on the opening day, one of the racers, James Tapp, lost his life in a crash.
In a practice run, one of Tapp's engines stalled, flipping the boat over and proving fatal for the driver. It was a painful reminder of how dangerous the sport can be.
Despite the tragedy, the stadium continued to be a success. People were thrilled by high-speed boat races.
Over the next decade, Miami boomed. Tourists flooded to the city, with the stadium playing its part.
Miami was the center of boat racing in the United States and hosted many different types.
But the stadium wasn't just about racing.
Miami Marine Stadium hosted pageants, concerts, bands, religious events. Patrons would pull their boats up out on the water and anchor nearby to watch whatever was going on.
If you have like a football stadium or a tennis stadium, the field is the stage there. But here there is no field. The field is the water. So stages were brought in.
Bill was one of the many fans lucky enough to enjoy some of the memorable concerts held here.
It's one of the unique things you can do is see a concert on your boat, getting here at noon and tying up boats 4 or 5 across. You know, I remember cooking lobsters and people were swimming in the water. Man, was that fun.
In 1972, a different kind of event drew eyes from across the whole country to the stadium. Richard Nixon was on the campaign trail for re-election as president.
President Richard Nixon held his youth rally at this stadium. The rally filled with Nixon supporters as they chanted, "4 more years."
The stadium was a symbol of Miami's growth as a city, but it became a victim of its own success.
As powerboat engines became bigger and stronger, powerboat racing moved into the wide open sea.
Mother Nature, though, would deal the final blow to the stadium.
Hurricane Andrew was August 24th, 1992. Remember, you would always talk about the big one? On that Saturday, it was coming straight in. I said, this is the big one. It's scary, and you don't know where it's going to hit.
Miami avoided a direct hit, but it was suspected that the stadium sustained some damage during the event, and it was declared unsafe for the public.
Post-hurricane, the city had other priorities and the stadium fell into disrepair. But the original damage assessment didn't sit right with some.
The assumption was for years that it's structurally unsound. And somebody, maybe the original architect, said, how does anybody know that?
Incredibly, after 20 years of closure, the original assessment was proven wrong.
A study was done, and it's fairly structurally sound. And that's what saved her. And in 2018, this was put on the National Register of Historic Places. It can never be torn down. And you can see, look at this. It looks like it'll last for 100 years.
A restoration effort is now underway, and there is hope these seats will one day be full again. The Miami Marine Stadium symbolizes a time when the city announced itself as an entertainment destination to be reckoned with.
It's part of our history. It's unique. Distinguishes Miami from all the competition. Nobody has this.
Abandoned structures hold the secrets of America's past. A canyon hides the ruined dreams of a couple who bet on America falling.
It's really one of the most legendary places in Los Angeles. There are many rumors about what the people who owned it wanted it to become.
A ghost town that offers a rare glimpse into a celebrated era.
And it's become an iconic place to visit and represents truly Americana at its best.
A seaside city conceals neglected buildings that help turn America into a global superpower.
The reason America is as great as it is our maritime culture. It's the maritime industries that have made America the country that it is.
And a much-loved tourist attraction where one woman took on a corrupt institution.
The struggles that she had with the city and, a lot of trying to fight, but eventually it became too much.
Scattered across the United States are abandoned structures. Forgotten ruins of the past, monuments to a bygone era. Each shines a light on the story of this land and its people. These are the secrets of hidden America. "100 miles south of Las Vegas, in the Mojave Desert, is a town that helped turn this vast continent-spanning land into one unified country.
The environment is hot, dry, appears to be desolate, it appears to be harsh.
There's basically a road, some railroad tracks, and then, rising out of the desert, this abandoned town.
Many of the buildings here are in ruins. But it's not a scene of total dereliction.
Some of them look like there's a little bit more life to them. So there's more going on here than first meets the eye, I think.
One structure has recently been restored to its former glory and is a big hit with those passing through, whether by car or by plane.
You sit here and watch people pull over, they see the sign, they want to take the picture in front of the sign. All day long, this goes on.
The sign is a symbol of a great nation-building achievement, a triumph that has been immortalized in American culture.
It figures in movies, television shows, and even songs.
This is something that shaped the country and made it what it is today.
Albert Okura, a well-known restaurant chain owner in Southern California, bought this ghost town in 2005.
The town, it was pretty much empty. All the buildings, there's no electricity, no water. It was just a shell.
This is the town of Amboy, and Albert's restoration work is putting it back on the map.
Amboy is getting more and more famous all over the world. And every day I wake up, I can't believe the opportunity to sit right in front of me.
The reason for this town's fame begins long before Albert was on the scene.
When you're exploring the grounds, you begin to realize that this story runs a lot deeper and a lot further back than you realized.
The town was established in 1883. Evidence of its origin is now only noticeable to the well-trained eye.
Typically, when you're traveling in the desert and you see the trees behind me, they're called salt cedars. And whenever you see them, they were usually planted by homesteaders. As you see along here in the railroad, they would have been used for windblock, and they're not native to the desert.
Steve Reyes lives 25 miles south of Amboy and is one of the few people who can paint a picture of the now disappeared original town.
The original schoolhouse would have been here, housing for the railroad workers. There would have been a store here as well.
At first, the settlement was simply a water and repair stop for the steam trains.
The steam engines could only go 9 miles before they needed to be replenished with water.
These water stop communities were named in alphabetical order from west to east, beginning here at the town of Amboy. But Amboy's future was about to dramatically change course thanks to a new invention: the automobile.
In the early 20th century, a car is really a luxury item only for the rich. But the manufacturers work hard to try to make them a more affordable item.
The revolutionary Ford Model T arrived in 1908, but good roads still lagged behind, especially outside of the cities.
There was really nothing out here. There was dirt tracks if you were lucky. But then, over time, these start to develop into roads.
In 1912, for the first time, Americans could take one road from East Coast to West Coast. It was called the National Old Trails Road. It came right through Amboy and would irreversibly change the town.
As modern travel shifted away from the railroad, the residents and the buildings would have moved up towards the road.
The road was now the focus of life in Amboy, but its love affair with automobiles was just getting started.
We start off with the National Old Trails Road, which is a singular type of road, east to west, but we're progressing to a system, a network of roads.
Arriving in 1926, the United States numbered highway system was the beginnings of the nationwide road network we recognize today.
The road that was coming past Amboy was reclassified in this new system, and it would become an icon, the classic Route 66.
The increasing traffic passing through Amboy caught the attention of a local man called Roy Crowell.
Roy was a mechanic and his wife was a cook, so you put the two together and you are able to create a magnificent concept of the gas station, the cafe, a husband and wife. It's just a wonderful kind of story that America was built on. These type of hardworking people that could create something out of nothing.
Roy and his wife built the service station and garage in 1938 and soon realized there was an opportunity for another business too.
Behind the cafe, we have quite a large motel. We have 18 rooms, so it tells you how well this place was doing. It was booming.
It was really a major thoroughfare of cars going up and down the highway. People were looking for rest stops. They needed a place to stay. And this being right in the middle of Needles and Barstow would be the natural place that people would stop. You could get something to eat, you could get gas up, and then you'd have a nice hotel where you can spend the night.
But many people knew of Amboy because it had been a stop on a journey triggered by desperation.
So Route 66, during the 1930s, we have a common belief that it was always this mode of travel for enjoyment. But really during the Dust Bowl era, it took kind of a darker side.
High winds churned up the bare and overplowed farmland in the American prairies, resulting in years of severe dust storms. Vast clouds of dust darkened the sky for days at a time. In many places, the dust drifted like snow, and residents had to clear it with shovels.
Route 66 really offered people a lifeline out of the Dust Bowl. And in John Steinbeck's famous novel, The Grapes of Wrath, he even refers to it as the Mother Road, as if it was the absolute key to survival for all these people.
Roughly 2.5 million people left the Dust Bowl states during the 1930s. It was one of the largest migrations in American history.
I think that's an important part of American society because it really changed the demographics of America. There was a huge influx of people coming into California. So what you would see across Route 66, especially in this area, towns grew and really flourished along Route 66. Amboy would have been one of those larger towns that offered the most amenities.
It grew to include 3 gas stations, 2 cafes, 4 garages, a post office, a church, and a school. But its real heyday was just around the corner.
After World War II, returning soldiers, the economy was good. People had expendable money to purchase cars. There's also associations that are encouraging people to travel along Route 66.
In 1959, Roy passed his businesses on to his son-in-law, Buster Burris, who gave the buildings a fresh new look. He also gave the town its now iconic sign.
The sign and the hotel lobby are really absolute paradigms of the architecture of the time, this gooey modernism, as it was called.
The new buildings gave Amboy a different aesthetic, but the flow of cars remained as steady as ever.
I was fortunate enough to interview a California Highway Patrol officer, and the one thing he talked a lot about was how busy the traffic was. It was this major travel artery through the desert into California.
But Amboy's glory days were numbered.
There was one thing that changed overnight that basically shut the town down, and people moved away and walked away from their stores, locked their doors, never to come back.
The death knell of this place was the opening of the new interstate just north of Amboy. It gave a more direct route from Needles to Barstow.
America is famous for undoing its historic narrative, and Route 66 is a prime example of that. All the successful businesses for many generations that were thriving along Route 66 suddenly get wiped out.
Starved of cars, the population plummeted. Buster clung to his investment until 1995, when he leased his properties to be used as film sets, before finally selling up completely in 2000. After decades of neglect, Amboy has started experiencing a renaissance driven by nostalgia.
So through the years, Amboy, really the birth of it become a tourist destination would have been with the advent of the internet. People from Europe started rediscovering Route 66, and that's when it really became a part of Americana. It was very common to see people from France, from Germany, to stop here at Amboy.
People used to pull into Amboy because it was between here and there. Now it's become an actual destination location.
Albert Okura was also drawn in by the magic of Route 66.
Baby boomers, my generation, they got involved in buying hot rods and Harley Davidsons. They wanted to ride the route. And that's why when Amboy came for sale, I knew I had to buy it.
Albert has restored the gas station, including its 1970s pumps, and has plans for other buildings on his property too.
We have 5 bungalow cabins, ideal for renting and to stay overnight. We need to get the utilities in, and I think that's our goal for this coming year.
But the big moment was back in 2019 with the relighting of the sign.
When we had a grand opening, we had a lot of people fly in, and we had up to 27 planes that day. We got us a lot of attention, a lot of press, become the focal point of everything we do here. It just symbolizes the whole movement of the Route 66 and the whole restoration thing.
Amboy's reawakening has spawned its own slogan, the ghost town that ain't dead yet.
Most of the towns along roads like this have vanished long ago, but Amboy gives us this tantalizing window into what life was like when this culture was at its height.
On the edge of Los Angeles, lies a sprawling collection of ruins that shows how fringe societies can lurk in the most unexpected of places.
It's a beautiful landscape. There's steep hills dotted with trees, quite the contrast to the never-ending concrete jungle that is Los Angeles.
But there's something surprising here in this wooded area, something that you wouldn't expect. What we see are stairs, so many stairs, climbing, climbing, climbing everywhere.
There are different pieces of this puzzle littered throughout the woods.
Years of gossip have added to the mystery of this site's true purpose.
There's so many different stories that have been told over the years about what happened here. But what we actually know is fascinating, but it's clearly not the full story.
Hadley Mears started researching the rumors about this place 20 years ago, after a hike here left her with unanswered questions she found too hard to ignore.
This is one of the 2 giant industrial-sized tanks that the folks here put up. They were trying to build something where they would have their own fuel, their own water, and very little dependence on the outside world.
Traveling deeper into the canyon, one building emerges from the trees that is the biggest hint yet as to the scale of this complex.
So this is the pump house, and this is where the double generator was at one point and where the water pump, we believe, was, and there's still a tank back there. And then all around here is basically the infrastructure to build this self-sustaining utopia. And as you're walking through this immense property, you'll see water pipes everywhere, still lining from different culverts to the river.
You also see a leveled out section, a garden.
They were very, very extensively trees growing food so that they'd become totally insular and take care of themselves.
The site has become known as Murphy Ranch.
This infrastructure was built primarily during the mid to late 30s, purchased under the alias Jessie Murphy Widow.
The project was a significant investment of time and money.
What's so remarkable about Murphy Ranch is that this is a hard place to build. We're in a canyon in the middle of the mountains. You have to come down a very long dirt trail to get here. The roads are very rudimentary, yet somehow they built all of this infrastructure, spent around $4 million on Murphy Ranch.
But the ruins that remain today don't begin to tell the whole story.
What they had here was stage 1, effectively, the infrastructure. What was planned next would have been the real deal, the mansion itself.
The project was never finished, but Hadley hunted down all the existing blueprints and discovered a surprising level of opulence.
Common theme between all these different plans is that they're grand. There's a library, multiple parlors, multiple bedrooms. It really seems like a place for a head of state and their government, not a normal rich person's mansion.
It has been said that what the owners were building here was to be based on National Socialist ideals.
Some say this was meant to be a headquarters for the Nazis out on the West Coast. Some kind of Nazi White House.
The scant ruins and lack of evidence has only served to fuel the legends. But in 1975, an affidavit from a man called Dr. Vincent shone significant light on the mystery.
That one piece of paper, which I have in my possession, is really where this entire legend comes from.
For years, there have been rumors about this property. But when Dr. Vincent decided that he was interested in buying this estate, he had to listen to the story. And the owners of the property had quite the story to tell.
There used to be a weird steel garage right here. And in this garage, a couple lived named Norman and Winona Stevens, and they owned all of this property. And it was in that garage Dr. Vincent initially heard what they had planned to do with it.
Norman and Winona Stevens' rumored connection to Nazism grew from a relationship they had with a persuasive man called Herr Schmidt.
Herr Schmidt is rather a mysterious and elusive character. We hardly know anything about him at all. There's just one article from the LA Times that reports that he was wanted by naval intelligence and ultimately rounded up.
But it wasn't Mr. Schmidt's nefarious activities that drew in the couple.
Winona claimed that she had long been interested basically in the occult and paranormal thought. He kind of convinced them both that he had these powers to see into the future, that they needed to build a self-sustaining, basically utopian colony based on National Socialist ideas, and that they needed to do it quickly because America was about to collapse.
If Dr. Vincent's account is true, hidden somewhere within this canyon, a Nazi stronghold was planned in preparation of Hitler overthrowing America.
Something that's not really discussed often in the history of Los Angeles is that there was a real history of Nazi supporters within this area.
From a Nazi perspective, something that LA had going for it was its port. It wasn't monitored, so it was an easy access point for propaganda materials.
The affidavit alludes to the Stevens connection to Nazism, using its alternative name, National Socialism. But there are also other stories that add weight to this claim.
There are rumors floating around that neighbors saw some of these American Nazis, so-called silver shirts, doing paramilitary maneuvers in the gardens and marching up the stairs.
We also know now that there were reports to government officials in Los Angeles who were involved in uprooting Nazis who were embedded in LA, that there was a mansion planned to be built in this area for fascist leaders. So there was some basis for all of these rumors.
Meanwhile, in Europe, the rise of Nazism would result in full-blown war. America initially resisted calls to join the fight, but their reluctance would not last.
In December of 1941, everything changed with the attack on Pearl Harbor.
This was also a pivotal moment for Murphy Ranch.
America is very much entering into the war, and anything that has any kind of allegiance whatsoever with Germany or Nazism is completely outlawed, at which point somewhere like this would have been overnight rendered entirely illegal.
We know that the Stevens stopped paying architects in 1941 because all available architectural plans cease after that date. Whatever was going on here, they were probably under enormous pressure to stop what they were doing.
Herr Schmidt was slow to react and ended up paying a heavy price.
Herr Schmidt was arrested for hiding shortwave radio equipment on the property and allegedly died in prison.
The Stevens stayed on at Murphy Ranch but never built anything more. Eventually, they had had enough and decided to cut their losses and sell up. A local philanthropist was the buyer and turned it into an artist's retreat.
This was actually a really special artist colony where folks could come for a certain amount of time and just focus on their writing. They commissioned Frank Lloyd Wright, one of the premier architects of all time, to build adorable little cottages on the property for the artists, and it really flourished for a few years. However, Huntington always overextended himself, began to lose money, and there was also always the threat of wildfires, and they closed the colony.
LA's Murphy Ranch is a confusing collection of ruins, rumors, and hard-to-link facts that will always be open to interpretation.
This is the city of make-believe. But the question is this just another of Hollywood's fantasy tales?
What exactly the Stevens' aims were, what really happened on this land during the 1930s, who else was actually even here, is a total mystery. I don't think we're ever going to know what actually happened.
At the heart of America's Rust Belt, within the city limits of Detroit, is a monument to betrayal.
We're on an island in the Detroit River, just a little upstream from the city's center. Parts are well tended. We have parks, places for swimming and picnics.
It feels like the perfect place to come and enjoy nature. So why are large parts of it completely disused?
This is Belle Isle, and at its center is a dilapidated collection of structures walled off from the rest.
Behind the fence is a complex of wooden ruins that look like something from a completely different time and place.
In some of the structures, you can make out these old, rusting cages, some with their doors just hanging open. It's enough to send shivers up your spine.
This enclosed compound played a significant role in one of Detroit's most notorious corruption scandals.
There were darker forces at play behind the scenes that no one could have predicted. This really was a hero to zero story.
Basically, he was taking advantage of the city. So many people are still upset about what he did to Detroit.
On an island in the Detroit River is a site whose glory days are firmly in the past.
It feels surreal. It's been almost 30 years since I've been inside of the gates here. When I was here in the early 80s, I never envisioned this would happen.
Angela Lugo Thomas knows this place better than most. She worked here during its heyday.
A lot of people got their first jobs working in this space. So I did concessions and I sold souvenirs. But one of my favorite things to do was making the cotton candy, because we used the old style cotton candy where you had a big silver bowl and you just go around with the stick until you get it to a certain size. It's just one of those first memories that you never forget.
Its story begins almost 100 years earlier, at a time when Detroit was on the up.
The first structures were erected here in 1895, just as Detroit was emerging as one of America's most prominent cities.
Detroit was a booming industrial city with factories and immigrants and a very fast-growing economy.
With repetitive jobs and cramped urban living conditions, the burgeoning workforce was in need of an altogether different form of entertainment. They found it here, at the Belle Isle Zoo.
These factory workers and their families, they didn't have the money to travel far outside the city. So the idea they could go to a beautiful island and stroll among these exotic creatures in a zoo, that must have just been delightful for them.
By 1909, they had over 150 animals, including bears, kangaroos, and monkeys.
As Detroit's fortune soared, so too did the zoos. But as industry began to leave the Motor City in the second half of the century, the number of patrons to the zoo dwindled.
After the 1950s, Detroit's population began to decrease rapidly. The city lost nearly 40% of its residents between 1950 and 1980.
This spelt real bad news for the zoo.
With gate receipts diminishing and the city's finances in turmoil, the Belle Isle Zoo looks set to close. until an ambitious restoration project turned the tide.
Lions and tigers and bears, oh my! Welcome to the opening of the Detroit Belle Isle Zoo.
The zoo was revived in the 1980s with a kind of African theme. They called it Safari Land. They built these structures that were kind of informed by an idea of African architecture.
The rejuvenated zoo was a big hit with the public.
Oh, they loved the zoo. I mean, a lot of people, it's their first time going to see animals. You know, a lot of the children had some of their first school trips here in this space.
A new area was added to the zoo in 1980. It was essentially an elevated boardwalk with the animals fenced in at ground level.
The renovation was spearheaded by a new zoo director, Khadija Shelby.
Under the stewardship of Khadija, the zoo bucked the trend of Detroit's declining fortunes. She was a real force in the city at the time, and she was also the nation's first African-American zoo director.
Angela had VIP access to the new facilities, as Khadija was her grandmother.
When I came here, I came with my grandmother. Soon as she was spotted at the bridge of Belle Isle, someone would radio in to let everyone else know that Miss Shelby has arrived and to get everything ready and prepared. She had everyone on their pins and needles because they knew that she expected excellence.
But even as the zoo was revived, Detroit's fortunes continued to go downhill.
Eventually, even Khadija's supreme efforts were not enough.
There was a time when this place was funded very well. And then, of course, like everything else, funding goes away. And so it was difficult for my grandmother to do a lot of the programming that she was used to doing. Sometimes they didn't have the right people to take care of the animals. So it became a point in time when you would go to the zoo and you really didn't see a lot of animals.
And in 1994, with a change of administration in City Hall, she was removed from her post.
It was hard for her to see this zoo, which was her baby, kind of, deteriorate. And so that was sad to watch. The spirit of this place changed after she was not here anymore.
8 years later, the zoo closed. But former director Khadija didn't give up. She joined a campaign aimed at raising the $700,000 needed to reopen the gates. And with another new mayor in City Hall, things were looking up.
In 2002, Kwame Kilpatrick became mayor of Detroit, sweeping into office on a tremendous wave of positivity and hope.
He was known as the hip-hop mayor. Not only was he young, but he was tall, he was handsome, and he promised very exciting times for Detroit.
The city was ecstatic to see him become mayor.
At the same time, Khadija's fundraising had been a success. And with Mayor Kilpatrick pledging his support for the reopening of the zoo, victory was at hand. But things didn't play out as expected.
The rug was completely pulled out from under the campaigners.
Money was raised for the zoo, and it looked like it was going to get a second chance.
But then, nothing happened.
Detroiters were waiting for construction to begin, which it did, but on the other side of the island.
Mayor Kilpatrick, he did a little switcheroo on people because instead of reopening and fixing this space up, he ended up then pouring that money into a new facility that's on the east side of the island called the Belle Isle Nature Center. A lot of people felt duped. They were very upset because he did not follow through on the promise.
And Kilpatrick's misdeeds went far beyond broken promises.
It soon came to light that he was involved in a massive corruption scandal. It involved kickbacks from contractors working for the city.
Suddenly, the whole dirty mess was exposed. This was corruption at the highest levels.
In 2013, Kilpatrick was convicted on 24 federal corruption charges and condemned to 28 years in prison. But in 2021, his sentence was commuted by President Donald Trump on his last day in office.
He's out now, but yeah, he's definitely left a scar on the city that I'm not sure a lot of people are going to get over.
Although it's unlikely the Belle Isle Zoo will open again, Angela is hopeful the space can be reimagined in another form.
Whether it's the nature preserve or maybe paintball, maze or whatever, just utilize the space because it is a big space just have vacant and nobody using it.
As part of its revival, Detroit is rediscovering its waterfront. I suspect that within a few years, we'll see this restored into a beautiful place to visit and a resource for the people of Detroit.
In South Carolina, 2 empty buildings mark how one city changed the course of American history twice.
We're right in the heart of one of the busiest cities on the southeast coast of the United States. We're in Charleston.
In the suburbs is a complex that was built in a time of crisis.
It's a weird, eerie feeling when you look at the inside of this large building. And as they say, if the walls could talk, we might be in trouble.
And on the waterfront, a building that was once the beating heart of the city.
Oh, this is one of those places that very few people know much about, but is really critical to the history of Charleston.
These 2 buildings tell the story of how Charleston found redemption, and in doing so, helped give rise to modern America. Don Campagna has lived in Charleston his entire life. He was a child when he first saw this building.
This building was designed to create in the citizens a feeling of appreciation for the beauty around them. If you're not impressed by this size and this scale, I don't know what it'll take to move your heart.
It's made of this beautiful blonde brick, built to look good, not just be functional.
This part of the structure is now empty, but clues to its function remain.
It's a huge empty space, but down by one of those banks of rubble, you can see flowing water.
Water plays an important role in the story of this building. Its history goes back over 100 years to when Charleston was one of the wealthiest port cities in America. Its prosperity ended when the country was thrown into civil war.
Charleston played a major role during the Civil War, and it was a pivotal city in the fight between the Union and the Confederate armies.
By the end of the conflict, Charleston was left in ruins by the Union Army.
The city was destroyed, absolutely decimated. It wasn't just a military conflagration, it was civilian suffering as well.
For decades, Charleston was a shadow of its former self. But in 1901, Congress gave the city a second chance by constructing a complex that would help transform the U.S. Navy. They built the Charleston Navy Yard.
The Navy built one of the largest dry docks on the entire eastern seaboard right here in Charleston. The shipyard focused mainly on the resupply and repair of ships that were already in the fleet.
The shipyard had a dry dock, crane, water pumps, and management buildings, creating thousands of new jobs. And its beating heart was a brand new power plant.
This is industrial size. You really have to have something that can generate the electricity to power all of that equipment to build the ships that you need.
The Naval Yard was a catalyst for more economic activity because it was attracting workers from all over the country.
The Charleston Navy Yard ushered in a new era of prosperity for the city. But in 1917, the United States entered a new conflict. And the Yard was about to play a special role in keeping the country safe.
During World War I, we had pretty much been a wooden boat Navy, and W1 gave the United States Navy a new steel-hulled fleet. That was as big a transition as we're seeing now between gas engines and electric cars.
The plant powered the refit of 35 destroyers and hundreds of smaller vessels. It was the start of what would become the most powerful naval force the world had ever seen.
The reason America is as great as it is our maritime culture. It's the maritime industries that have made America the country that it is.
Charleston helped prove that America was willing and able to defend itself on the world stage. Its new challenge was to protect the people who fought for it.
Even though America and the Allies won World War I, they only just coped with the demands put on hospitals to treat those injured and hurt.
It was said that the crew of just one destroyer would fill every hospital bed in Charleston.
They needed more capacity and decided to build a bigger, better hospital district right here in Charleston.
In the downtown area, they built the new 33-acre Navy Hospital District.
I don't think there was any question that at that point, the government had a very strong inkling that we were likely to wind up in a war and that we were going to have casualties, and we had to be prepared.
The new facility was equipped with an X-ray department, an operating theater, and a recreational courtyard that filled the building with light. Charleston was ready if America was ever thrust into another war. And in 1941, it was.
As many as 4,000 wounded soldiers were treated here every month, many of whom were fighting in Europe and Africa.
There were 75,000 casualties that came into Charleston. The people that came back on those hospital ships were the most seriously wounded, the most in desperate need of care.
The Charleston Navy Hospital was well prepared. It used pioneering methods to care for its patients.
The hospital was designed around the courtyard with different wings all around it. And actually what was revolutionary about the design was that it actually enabled different wards to treat specific injuries.
If you had a doctor that was particularly good at doing repair of legs or repair of arms, then it would be nice for that doctor to be able to go from one patient to the next. It was more efficient use of their personnel.
The new model of separating patients into wards became the basis of modern clinical care. After the Second World War, the Navy Hospital District continued to care for wounded veterans for nearly 3 decades. In 1996, the aged Navy Yard finally closed. Today, Charleston is a cultural capital of the South, its history forged in 3 great conflicts. People like Don Campagna help keep that history alive.
This needs to be a monument of sorts to the memory of the people who didn't leave here and the people who did, because they both did their duty. If we're ever going to tell the story of that generation and their service and sacrifice, I can't think of a better place than a hospital that made them well and sent them home.